When Yun Shi Dance returned to the royal mansion, it was already dark. As soon as she entered the door, Lu Gu fluttered out of bed, tugging at her sleeve, constantly pouring out her bitterness. "Your Highness, slave girl, please, next time don't let the slave girl pretend to be sick. The slave girl is used to working, so letting the slave girl lie on the bed for a day is really difficult for the slave girl." Yun Shimai laughed softly and reached out to nod on Lu Ji's head. "Silly girl, you won't even enjoy the blessings you have." At this moment, the voice of a servant girl sounded outside the door. "Your Highness, His Highness has invited you to the main hall to have your meal." Lu Gu glanced at Yun Shi Dance and saw her shake her head without moving, and immediately replied back, "Go back and tell His Highness that today, Princess Wang is weak and should not go out to eat, and that it's fine to bring the evening meal to your room." Yes. Yun Shi Dance had wanted to have a peaceful dinner, but it seemed that some people always didn't let her have her way. No, Dugu Haran himself came striding in with his dinner plate. Yun Shimai raised her eyebrows. She wouldn't be so stupid as to think that Dako Hao Ran was doing this because he was in love with her. After Dugu Haran helped her to sit down on a chair and sat himself on her side, Yun Shimai raised her eyebrows at him and said softly, "Your Highness, have you taken the wrong medicine?" Dekuro Hojo shook his head very seriously. "No. You have poison in this meal?" Dr. Hojo shook his head again. "No. So the king has a brain fart." Dugu Haran took a deep breath, looked deeply at Yun Shimai, and called out to her in a low voice, "Yun Shimai." "What?" Yun Shimai blinked her eyes, seemingly innocent but actually dark and sinister. "Are you going to die if you don't piss me off for a day?" "Oh, no, it's just going to be a little hard. Besides, my concubine is already dying." Dugu Haran was frantic. He suddenly realized how it was so hard for him to be nice to Yun Shimai. He was very tired of this Yun Shi Dance. Every time he tried to appease her a bit, but every time he was almost exasperated by her to the point of being half dead. If on weekdays, he would have thrown up his sleeve and left, but this time the Empress Dowager gave an order that he must personally take care of this woman. Now that General Yun is back in the house, it's just a matter of enduring it. He twisted his head and served a bowl of rice in front of Yun Shi Dance, patiently saying to her, "This is the meal that this king has specially instructed his subordinates to prepare for you. It's fine, soft and nutritious, you try it." Yun Shi Dance turned around outside for a day, patrolled the 4 stores he just got, and inadvertently ran into someone who seemed extremely useful to him. His mood was extremely good, and now he is even pretending to be naive and selling himself to the world, lifting up his flowery eyes, and speaking to Dugu Haran in a deep and delicate voice, "Your Highness, you are so good to me. After my concubine gets well, I will definitely stay with your Highness every inch of the way, and serve your Highness at all times." She tried desperately to squeeze out a few tears of emotion, and before the meal was even eaten, she felt like she was going to be sickened by the look on her face. Without any trace, Dugu Haran slightly shifted his body away a little, not allowing Yun Shimai to snuggle into his arms. Seeing her daffy look with tears hanging on her chin, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disgust. Chapter 27, Restrictions on Freedom. He is disgusted by even one more look at her, but she still wants to stick to him all the time. Dugu Haran, who wanted to calmly appease her for a while, could no longer sit still, took a deep breath, hid the disgust under his eyes, set the rice bowl on the tray, got up and walked to the window, pretending to look at the scenery. He disliked Yun Shi Dance too much, so he also didn't notice that when he turned around by feigning to look at the scenery, the corners of her lips curved out into a wry and smug light smile. She had only just begun the first step of her wealth-raising plan, so how could she let this asshole prince restrict her personal freedom? If he came to appease her from time to time, wouldn't she have no time to sneak out of the palace to do her own business? Look at that look of disgust on his face, yuck. She didn't even look at a self-righteous big sand pig like him. It was better to dislike her, it was better that he ignored her completely so that she could be free to handle her own affairs. She now had to think hard about how to change those 4 messes of Yun Shuish and make them strong so that they could make more money for her. That and Choyong should be a usable talent. I'll have to go see if he's listened to her instructions and taken care of himself someday. Dugu Haran stood at the window for a long time, but he didn't see Yun Shimai get up and follow her in a flamboyant manner, so he curiously turned back to look, but he saw that she was already eating in a serious manner. Her quiet appearance was actually quite beautiful and attractive. This thought flashed, Dugu Haran's face immediately surfaced a flash of disbelief. He would actually think that she is still clear and beautiful. This woman is obviously ugly and stupid, less than 1/10,000th of Shui's sleeve. Where is she beautiful? He must have stayed with her for a long time, and even his aesthetics have unconsciously changed. He shook his sleeve as if some toxic dust had gotten on it. Yunshi Dance, who was eating her meal, was actually still secretly watching Dugu Haran's every move. When she saw him like this, she couldn't help but secretly laugh. Of course she knew what he was flinging. Since he was so disgusted, why did he still rely on here and not leave? Go, 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 before she can't even eat her meal, and that food just sticks to her stomach and it's unbearable. At this moment, Lon Duor entered Yunshi Dance's courtyard with a maid, and she stood outside the door, her eyes filled with jealousy. The king obviously prefers himself, but Yun Shimai, this hateful woman, relying on the fact that she has a strong backer, forced the king to dominate in his own courtyard, which really makes people angry and hateful. If there was no Yunshi Dance, she might have been the rightful consort. When she thought of this, her voice couldn't help but be a little more delicate, and she daintily went up and called out, "Sister Wangfei, is His Highness here with you?" Someone from the palace has come, saying that the emperor has won a good painting, and invited His Highness to go to the palace to savor it. As soon as her words fell, she saw Dugu Haran striding out of Yunshi Dance's house with a touch of relaxed pleasure on his face, asking loudly, "Is that so? Blue side consort, quickly go and have someone prepare a car, this king will immediately enter the palace." Inside the house, Yun Shimai, supported by Lu Gu, closely chased out the door, carrying a lingering expression on her face as she called out to Dugu Haran, who was leaving in big strides, "Your Highness, my concubine will also go to the palace with you." Lon Duor gently dodged in front of Yun Shimai, deliberately blocking her gaze towards Dugu Haran, and said under her breath, "Your Highness, you have not yet recovered from your serious illness, how can you run around and exert yourself? Aren't you letting His Majesty not feel at ease? This consort and the king are unwilling to part." Yun Shimai said sadly. With his back turned to her, a feeling of disgust once again rose in the heart of Dugu Haran, and he walked away without looking back. Seeing this, Lon Duor raised her hand, covered her mouth with her sleeve, and with a light smile on her face, she said to Yun Shimai, "Wangfei, if you want to not be separated from the king, you have to think of other ways. Fair, let's go." Su Hongfei, who was following behind Lon Duor, also gloated and glanced at Yun Shimai's master and servant, and contemptuously trailed her master as she left. "Your Highness, they're too hateful to disrespect you like that," Lu Gu exasperatedly said as she glared at the backs of Randall's master and servant. She thinks that the Wangfei is really pretty and good-hearted, but unfortunately, the king always fails to see her goodness and never treats her well. Now even Blue Side Consort is trying to bully the Wang Consort. Does this deserve my consort's anger? You're a little girl, what do you know? Even if your master is the crown princess, sometimes you still need to be careful with your words, didn't I tell you? Beware of walls with ears. Yun Shimai sighed slightly. This girl was too loyal, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to resist shouting for her one day and disrupt her plans for nothing. Randall wants to bully her. That would have to be seen if she had that ability or not. But Your Highness, it's too rude and excessive for them to treat you like this. There will be a time when they regret it. Yunshi Dance gently shook her head, "Well, people are all gone, there's nothing lively to see, let's also go back to the house to rest. Today you're tired of lying down, but I'm still tired of running." That damned scumbag had come to keep watch from the moment she'd walked in the door, and that meal had just been unpleasant, so now it was her turn to enjoy it. "Crown Princess, you walk a little slower." Lu Gu was busy stepping forward to assist Yun Shimai. Pfft. Did you forget that I'm pretending to be sick? Helping what? Quickly go and change some delicious food for me, I can't eat what Duguharan served me. Yun Shimai laughed lightly and said to Lu Gu. Yes, Lu Gu will go right away. Lu Gu glanced at Yun Shier in surprise, and then busily withdrew her surprised gaze. She realized that her master had really changed, although she was still not allowed to be liked by the king, but she was not as helpless and sad as before, and there seemed to be a feeling that made people stop worrying. However, she liked this current appearance of the crown princess. Duguharan, who had left Yun Shi Dance's courtyard, put away the look of excitement on his face. In fact, he likes calligraphy, and painting is just an excuse to make the emperor think that he is not interested in the regime, only indulging in the joy of red sleeves. Tonight, his brother suddenly let him into the palace to enjoy the paintings again, afraid that he thought of what idea to test him. Apart from Yun Shui's sleeve, no one had ever seen that he also had such a wise and steady side, and if such a side was seen by Duguhautian, he was only afraid that his defense against him would be far more than what it is today. It wasn't quite late at night, but the entire Tsangdong country was already shrouded in a slight darkness. The majestic and tall imperial city, in the night color, showed a more solemn feeling. Only when Duguharan's carriage arrived at the palace gates, a eunuch with a smile on his face stepped forward to greet him. Ah, King Jin has come. My slave greets King Jin. His Majesty was so happy that he couldn't wait for tomorrow after getting a good painting that he asked his old slave to wait here for King Jin to enter the palace. Duguharan, who was sitting inside the carriage, had a faint touch of mockery in his eyes. How could he not know what the emperor was anxious about in his heart? A calligraphy and painting is just a painting. Even if he likes it more, he doesn't have to rush to let him come to the palace so late at night. He let out a through the curtain and said, "Why did the eunuch have to come to meet you personally? It's not like this king doesn't know the way." Chapter 28, The Idle Prince #, That eunuch just laughed along with him, his feet quickly following the side of the carriage. This was only near the palace gates. A little further in, it was King Jin's carriage that could not enter. The eunuch guided Duguharan towards Duguhautian's chambers, and outside the gilded hall, he reported to the people inside the hall with a shrill voice, "Your Majesty, King Jin has arrived." Duguhautian, who stood in front of the wide imperial table with his back to the door of the hall, put away his cold and hostile expression, and when he turned his head, he already had a face as warm as the spring breeze. "Oh, King Jin, you can come. I have obtained a good painting. Knowing that you are a lover of paintings, I specially invited you to come into the palace to savor it. Come, come, come," he beckoned to Duguharan with a cordial look, "come to the table and see whose handwriting this is. Can this painting still catch your eye?" His voice, with a few points of generosity and favor, as if Duguharan was really his very favored younger brother. However, if King Jin really didn't pose the slightest threat to him, he wouldn't mind treating him better and letting him be a powerless, idle prince for the rest of his life. Only, was King Jin really as he acted? Duguharan also had a delighted look on his face, and when he saw his imperial brother beckoning, he quickly leaned over, and when he looked down and saw the painting on the desktop, he was slightly surprised. Is this painting an ancient painting that has been lost for many years in legend? It was made by Zheng Chou, who was in the midst of his country's fame at the time of its founding. He excitedly looked towards Duguhautian. The painting was indeed a good painting, which could be said to be of great value, and this painting was precisely painted by a famous artist, Mr. Zheng Chou, at the time of the founding of the Tsangdong country. In the painting, the rivers and mountains were majestic and the rivers were magnificent, showing the magnificence of the newly established Tsangdong kingdom. Duguharan's sword eyebrow slightly raised. What is the meaning of the imperial brother showing him this painting? What do you want him to evaluate? In a sidelong glance, he caught a hint of cold hostility at the corner of Duguhautian's lips, and when the other party's gaze was directed at him, he had already lowered his head to carefully enjoy the painting. Not bad, it should be Mr. Zheng's work. It's so beautiful and magnificent. It leaps all the magnificent colors of my Dome kingdom into the painting. He pointed at the painting on the table and exclaimed with heartfelt admiration. Dugu Haotian glanced at him with a light smile and suddenly asked, King Jin, the kingdom is so beautiful, doesn't King Jin want to share a bit of the state affairs for his royal brother? Dugu Haoran looked at the emperor in disbelief, blinked his eyes and asked in confusion, why did your brother say that? Your brother has made our Dome so strong and stable. I am glad that Dome has such a bright ruler every day, and I still do my part on weekdays. What's wrong? What's wrong? Looking at Dako Haoran's puzzled expression, Dako Haotian's brows frowned slightly. King Jin, is he really at ease doing insignificant things in the court? Is he willing to be an idle prince? He was doing things on weekdays, but they were just the usual chores, just like most officials in the court who didn't have much ambition. Could this be his true thoughts? Since he was a child, he has been deeply loved by his father. Among several brothers, Dugu Haoran is smart and capable of writing martial arts. I thought that he would be the biggest one of the strongest enemy, but I can't imagine that his mind is not on the affairs of the country. Ha ha ha. Dugu Haotian hid the doubt in his heart and laughed cheerfully. King Jin is overly concerned. I rarely have a moment of leisure in my heart, which has the time to have anything on my mind. Come, let's take a look at this painting style again. How? It was obvious that he was uneasy with himself, yet he still had to make a picture of caring about himself. Dugu Haoran secretly mocked in his heart, but shifted his gaze along with Dugu Haotian's topic. After the two of them supported the lamp and enjoyed the painting for a while, Dugu Haoran excused himself by saying that the princess was not yet recovered from her illness, and the Empress Dowager had ordered him to take care of it in person, so he asked to go back to the residence. Dugu Haotian is just to test him by enjoying the paintings, and now that the suspicion in his heart has subsided a lot, he nodded and allowed him to leave the palace and go back to his house. When passing through the west gate, in the shadow of the nicknamed flowers and trees, a familiar slender figure made Dugu Haoran's footsteps stall slightly. The figure seemed to sense that someone was approaching, and with a slight hesitation, slowly turned around, showing a bit of nobility and elegance under the reflection of the pale moon. So it's Prince Jin. A soft and gentle female voice, slowly turning around. If it wasn't Yun Shuishi, who was it? Although the heart expects to meet Yun Shui's sleeve in the palace, but she appeared in this small mirror lake, Dugu Haoran cannot help but be a little surprised, and then walk a few dozen steps. Is the imperial brother's chambers? Is it Shui sleeve is going to see the imperial brother? Suppressing the bitterness in his heart, Dugu Haoran slowly stepped forward and stood in front of Yun Shui's sleeve, his star-like eyes staring at Yun Shui's sleeve. Lady Water Concubine is going to see the emperor. Yun Shui's sleeve's pair of beautiful eyes were slightly brimming with water, and the faintly mesmerizing moon further pronounced her beauty. The palace maid who followed her bowed her head and retreated to the side so as not to hear their conversation. Yun Shui's sleeve turned back before she said in a sulky voice, Your Highness. Shui's sleeve heard that Your Highness had entered the palace, so. As the emperor's consort, she had said such treacherous words, but Dugu Haoran's eyes brightened slightly when he heard them. How good would it be if the main consort in the royal palace was not Yun Shimai, but Yun Shuishi? Why didn't she report to General Yun in the first place and let Yun Shimai marry into the palace? When he thought of this, his eyes dimmed and he took a step back, faintly saying, Thank you, Lady Water Concubine, for thinking of me. If Lady Water Concubine wants to go see the emperor, now is just the right time to do so, and in a moment, the emperor's son should be resting. Yun Shui seemed not to hear his words as if, lowered his head, a weak and helpless look, self-conscious whispered, At the beginning, Shui's also had to parents' request, unwilling to enter the palace. But the parents' order is difficult to disobey. Water sleeve finally went to the palace. She lifted her sleeve and pressed it gently under her eyes. There wasn't actually a tear there. Seeing Dugu Haoran standing there quietly without moving, she knew that his heart was by no means as calm and wave-free as his figure. This man in front of her she knows too well. they have known each other for so many years, he has always had her position in his heart, if she had not married into the palace, as long as she wants, that the position of the rightful consort of the Jin Wangfu, Dugu Haran will definitely give it to her without hesitation. Such a prince with outstanding looks and noble status, she naturally would not let go. It was rare to have a man of such a high position to be infatuated with her. She also had to leave a way out for herself, at least when she was ostracized by other concubines in the palace. She also had a helper. Her voice was sad, but her eyes were full of confidence. Only the moonlight was too dark and Dugu Haran was standing behind her, so she didn't see it. Your Highness must be complaining about Shui Sleeve in your heart over Shui Sleeve's entry into the palace. Lady Water Concubine has thought too much. If there is nothing else, this king will take his leave. Dugu Haran's brows subconsciously furrowed. It's hard to disobey your parents' orders. Although she had a point, but then why didn't she think that as long as she came and begged him, asking him to make a decision, he would definitely find a way to keep her out of the palace. But she hadn't revealed a single bit of information to him at that time, so much so that he had completely missed the opportunity. Hashtag chapter 29, be careful what you say hashtag what's the point of talking about it now? King Jean, it's rare for the two of us to be able to talk so quietly, can't you stay a little longer? I didn't expect that after saying so much and doing so much drama, Dugu Haran would leave with little reaction. Yun Shueisui Sleeve froze slightly, and then she was busy chirping to call out to Dugu Haran, who raised his feet to leave. This man, even if she doesn't love, can't let go. What's more, if it's not because she's too much in love with power, this man is more attractive to her than Dugu Haotian. What else does Lady Water Concubine want to say? This is in the palace, the empress should be careful with her words. Although Dugu Haran said this, his footsteps stopped. Yun Shueisui Sleeve's fine eyebrows gently raised, curling towards him. Her soft hand slowly reached out to bit Dugu Haran's big hands that were exposed outside the sleeves. The large hand, which had been slightly cool, shivered slightly and uncontrollably as it touched her small hand. Dugu Haran's heart can no longer afford to be cold and hard, slowly lowering his eyes to look at Yun Shuesu. Chapter 1, Coincidence. Conspiracy. Yun Shimai opened her eyes, and before she could regain her senses, she only saw a beautiful woman dressed in gorgeous clothes reach out and push towards her. Yun Shimai, you deserve to die. Poof! Yun Shi Dance fell straight into the lotus pond, and fishy cold water poured in through her eyes, ears, mouth, and nose. What the hell is going on here? Who is that woman? Why did she push herself? Is there any mistake? Just rolled the elevator, now rolling into the pond. You'll have to read the calendar when you go out from now on. Ah! Wang Fei. Someone come quickly, save the princess, she doesn't know how to swim. Meyer. Quickly save my dancer, if you can't save her, I'll make you all die with her. Meyer, my old man's Meyer. With the last heartbreaking shout, Yun Shi Dance slowly closed her eyes and her body sank toward the bottom of the pool. Head, it hurts. Yun Shi Dance slowly opened her eyes, and what came into her eyes was the ancient and very luxurious room. She touched her head, which was about to split as if it were cracked, and the corners of her mouth twitched. Suddenly, large fragments of memories flooded into her mind, rushing against Yun Shimai's nerves and causing her temples to throb with pain. Yun Shi Dance, Tsangdong State Protector General Knight War of the Fifth Daughter, last year married to the Tsangdong State's first beautiful man Dugu Haran as a wife, for people nymphomaniac, very obsessed with the beautiful man, married for a year, Dugu Haran never stepped into her room half a step, enough to see how disgusted with her. Although the new memories were exceptionally difficult to accept, Yun Shimai slowly fused with these memories with her amazing endurance, but the entire fusion process made the corners of Yun Shimai's lips twitch because the past Yun Shimai's degree of philandering had already reached an indestructible and outrageous level. I'll be damned. This can't be the legendary bloodshed crossing over. Is it really appropriate to play with your life right away? There seemed to be nothing else in her head at all but beautiful men and hocus pocus. Gosh, if I could be given another chance, I just want to say out loud to the world, don't ever clash. That day, is the Empress Dowager, that is, his aunt's birthday. She and Duge Haran together to celebrate the birthday, but, very coincidentally, no Duge Haran has always liked his third sister Yun Shuishi, so she rushed over to the Yun Shuishi dispute. The result is, that is the case. Yun Shi Dance smiled coldly. Yun Shui's sleeve asked her own maid to call herself and her to go to the garden for a small talk, while she happened to see Yun Shui's sleeve and Duge Haran making love to each other. Was this really a coincidence? It's more appropriately called conspiracy. Yun Shi Dance slowly got up from the bed, but just as her feet touched the ground, her head was a dizzy spell, and she fell back onto the bed, grunting in pain as she collapsed onto the bed. At this time, the door opened, a small girl carrying a water basin walked in, seeing Yun Shi Dance's teeth-bared appearance, immediately nervously jogged over, carefully helped her to lie down on the bed. The emotion is a little excited. Wang Fei, you can finally wake up. You have been sleeping for 2 days and 2 nights, but worried to death, slave girl. ## Chapter 2, Cold Laughter, Irony ## Yun Shi Dance looked at this little girl. She was the first person to realize she had fallen into the water that night, her personal maidservant Lu Gu. Seeing Yun Shimai's expressionless face, Lu Gu wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes. Your Highness, the Empress Dowager has been remembering your body and said that as soon as she wakes up, she will report immediately, so the slave girl will go and pass on the message. Lu Gu was just about to turn around and leave when her sleeve was pulled by Yun Shimai. The Crown Princess. Where's Dako Hojo? Yun Shi Dance's voice was a bit cold. Lu Gu was stunned. In the past, Yun Shimai had always referred to the king as her husband, but today, she even directly called the king by his first name. Yun Shimai raised an eyebrow. Why do you keep looking at me? Could it be that my face is disfigured after being soaked in water? Lu Gu immediately came back to her senses and lowered her head to reply, No, there is no damage to Wang Fei's face. For some reason, she always felt that there was something different about the crown princess since she was flooded, but she couldn't tell exactly where it was different. Back to your highness, your highness. Returned to the house a long time ago. Lu Gu stammered. Yun Shi Dance nodded, coldly smiling in her heart. If Duge Haran had been guarding her side, she would have remembered that he still cared about that little bit of shallow conjugal love and might have considered being merciful, since he cared so little about his own life and death. Then she didn't have to care about the old feelings. Waving her hand, Yun Shi Dance gently said, Back to the Empress Dowager, this consort has just awakened and needs to rest, so please ask her old man not to have to come and see. Later on, this consort will personally go and ask for peace. You go down first. Liuga nodded, yes. Only once Lu Gu went out, she saw Yun Shui's sleeve walking from a distance with her maid, and her face couldn't help but show a difficult color. Cloud Water Sleeve in the general's residence in the open and secret to the princess made a lot of trips, and that night she really is the Cloud Water Sleeve Wang Fei pushed down, but she is just a maid. People micro-speech light, even if said the truth, others will not believe. Slave servant, see Lady Water concubine. Seeing them approach, Lu Gu respectfully saluted. Has this palace's sister woken up? Yun Shui's sleeve's tone was very gentle, but her tone was arrogant and cold. Yun Shimai, that nymphomaniac, is also worthy of being her sister. I really don't know what kind of psychedelic drug this nymphomaniac had given to her father and aunt to make them favor her so much, making her, the #1 beauty of the Dong country, serve as a green leaf for this nymphomaniac for so many years. Back to Consort Shui, my royal consort is still asleep. Lu Gu spoke with trepidation, and her face was somewhat unnatural. Seeing this, Yun Shui's sleeve let out a cold smile. This palace will go in for a look and then leave, get out of the way. Lady Water Princess, my royal consort fell into the lotus pond that night and fell asleep for 2 days, now she has a splitting headache, please Lady Water Princess come. Back another day. Hashtag chapter 3, narrowing the gap. Hashtag before Lu Gu could finish her sentence, the red lotus beside Yun Shueishui's sleeve slapped her in the face, causing Lu Gu to carry on straight before her eyes. Bold bitch's servant girl, how dare you stop my lady's way, skin tight isn't it? Covering her face with tears in her eyes, Lu Gu immediately fell to her knees and choked in resignation. Slave girl knows her mistake, please ask Empress Water Concubine for forgiveness. Yun Shui's sleeve glanced at the room, a flash of color in the bottom of her eyes. Yun Shi dance has always been reckless, the slightest displeasure will make a big fuss. Now that the commotion outside is so big, even if she sleeps heavily, she should wake up. How is it that there's no movement at all? It's really strange. And at this time, the room, Yun Shi dance both eyebrows tightly knit, MD, would have liked to take a good rest, after recuperating to find Yun Shui's sleeve to settle the score. I did not expect that this woman so quickly made a scene at the door. It seems that if she does not take power, Yun Shui's sleeve has also been to take her as a Hello Kitty. Lu Gu, why is it noisy outside? What kind of people are they? How dare they make noise within the palace? Do they want to lose their lives? Suddenly, a cold voice came from inside the house. Yun Shui's sleeve outside the door was inexplicably shaken, not only because of the coolness of the voice, but also because Yun Shu dance's words had accustomed her to a great crime. The palace is noisy and noisy, if this is known by the Empress Dowager, will be thrown to the royal shrine to reflect for 3 days and 3 nights. Not getting a response from outside for a long time, Yun Shi dance sat up from the bed, stretched, shook her neck, rubbed her head, and went into full combat mode. After doing this, the person outside the room also moved. Sister turns out to have woken up. Sister came to see you. Oh. So it's sister. Lu Gu, quickly invite sister in. This consort has not caught up with sister for a long time, just take this opportunity to make friends with sister. Yes. Lu Gu got up and pushed the door open. Yun Shui's sleeve slowly entered. At the first sight of Yun Shi dance, a flash of murderous anger flashed under her eyes. This damn nymphomaniac, how come she didn't drown? Yun Shi dance took in the hatred in her eyes, but didn't move, just very politely gave up her seat and ordered Lu Gu to serve tea. After taking her seat, Yun Shi dance looked at Yun Shui's sleeve with a lazy gaze, which tended to Yun Shui's sleeve. I leaned. Yun Shi dance heart immediately will not calm down. This is not exactly in their own supermarket collision that. The corners of Yun Shi dance's mouth twitched a few times. Could this be the legendary wrongdoer? Yes. Constantly tossing and turning inside, Aunt Yun took a few deep breaths and sighed. As long as she was here, she was at peace. She carefully measured the woman in front of her, decisively beautiful, enough capital to make men fall for her, but the true beauty of a woman is not only to have a beautiful face, but also to have a beautiful and noble heart, and the Yun Shui's sleeve in front of her is obviously not. Hashtag chapter 4, acting is the best. Sister fell into the water the day before yesterday. I don't know how the body is. Yun Shuishi asked with concern. Yun Shimai hooked up her lips. This Yun Shuish's acting skills can be described as top-notch. It is a pity not to enter Hollywood. Obviously she pushed Yun Shimai into the water, but at this time like nothing to say words of concern. How to say it? How can I put it? It really makes people feel bad. Sister's body is no longer in any serious trouble. Yun Shuishi looked at Yun Shimai with some consternation. What was wrong with this girl? It is reasonable to say that she knows that she pushed her into the water should be hysterical and she tangled is. How a calm face. But Cloud Water Sleeve turned to think, this girl nymphomaniac the brain is not very good, maybe has long forgotten it. Yun Shi dance half hanging down his head, gently smiled, suddenly asked, sister married into the palace as a consort for a few years long, should understand the rules of the palace. Yun Shueso was slightly stunned. What does sister mean by this? Yun Shi dance's eyes flashed. Sister was resting in her room, suddenly heard someone shouting outside the room, "I don't know who is so unruly, sister would like to ask sister, if this matter is known to aunt, I don't know how aunt will be dealt with." Yun Shueisui Sleeve's face instantly turned into pig liver color, then softly said, "Just now Honglian was also in a hurry, that's why she messed up the rules, please ask sister to forgive her for this girl who doesn't know the depth of the matter. If it is made to the Empress Dowager there, Red Lotus death or not is secondary, the Empress Dowager will definitely complain that she is not good at disciplining, thus spoiling her grand plan to ascend to the Empress's throne." Heh! Yun Shi Dance laughed a little, hands fiddling with the silk in his hands, the bottom of his eyes is the meaning of the unknown sharpness. Sister jokes, sister which has that big right to ask for a crime should also go to the aunt to ask for a crime, do you say is not it? Yun Shueisui Sleeve face of the smile abruptly stiffened, viciously gouged out a glance behind the red lotus, it seems that Yun Shimai is trying to grasp this matter does not let go, the heart tightened, this matter, must be handled with care. Just, why did the always idiotic Yun Shi Dance suddenly become stern and wise? Is there a high person in the back of the guidance, or was flooded brain? Just at this time, Yun Shui's Sleeve suddenly saw the doorway flashed a silhouette, she immediately passed a color towards Red Lotus immediately rushed to Yun Shi Dance's feet, plopped down on the ground, crying, "Wang Fei, it's the slave's fault, it's all the slave's fault, a little bit of nothing to do with Auntie Shui Fei's business, it's the slave's fault, Wang Fei want to punish the slave, just punish the slave." Just as Yun Shi Dance wondered why Hong Lian was doing this, a low drink suddenly came from the doorway. "Yun Shi Dance, what are you up to again?" Yun Shi Mai twisted her head and finally understood the reasoning. Hashtag Chapter 5, not to be underestimated hashtag only to see Dugu Haran striding in with an icy face, looking heartily at Yun Shui Shi, who was being aggravated. Yun Shi Dance massively looked at Dugu Haran, this man could only be described with one word, and that was handsome. But he was cold all around, like an ice sculpture. I really don't know what there is to like about such a man who doesn't understand gentleness. In the past, Yun Shimai was even infatuated with him for so many years. Ahem, that said, in the past, Yun Shi Dance was infatuated with a lot of handsome men at the same time, and Dako Hao Ran was just one of them. Dugu Haran strides to the cloud water sleeve in front of the eyes, at this time the cloud water sleeve pair blossom with rain, huffing and puffing, so pitiful, Dugu Haran wanted to put his hand on her shoulder to comfort, but after hesitating again and again, or put it back. Yun Shi Dance sympathetically glanced at Dako Hao Ran, the expression on his face was simply a non-human one. "Auntie Shui Fei, what's wrong with you?" Dugu Haran looked at Yun Shueisui Sleeve in pain, his heart twitching. "King Jin, this palace. Yun Shueisui Sleeve cried heaven and earth, a pair of tearful eyes pitifully looked at the rushing Dugu Haran. "Your Highness." At this time, Honglian knelt and crawled to Dugu Haran's feet, tugging at his pant leg and crying loudly, "Your Highness, after the Wang Fei woke up, she has been complaining that day it was Lady Water concubine who pushed her into the water, and she also had to report to the Empress Dowager that day. You were there, and you saw that Lady Watercress didn't do anything to the princess, right? But the Wang Fei had to frame Our Lady, Your Highness, you must be clear in your judgment." Honglian's eyes were red, as if she had suffered much aggression. Yun Shi Dance coldly smiled, "The upper beam is not correct, the lower beam is crooked, the master is the queen of the movie, the acting skills of the servants should not be underestimated." Dugu Haran glared angrily at Yun Shimai, his fire-breathing gaze looked like it was going to burn 2 holes in her body. "What happened on that day, this king saw it clearly, obviously it was you who lost your footing and fell into the water, why do you want to blame it on the water sleeves?" Yun Shi Dance, "The loss of this king came to want to take you back to the house to recuperate, early to know that you are so vicious, this king should throw you in the palace self-destruction." "Heh." Yun Shimai looked at Dugu Haran, a cold aura flashed under her eyes, she got up, slowly walked to Dugu Haran's eyes, and questioned in a cold voice, "Your Highness, you are my husband, where were you when I fell into the water?" Dekuro Haoran's brows were furrowed and he didn't say anything. Yun Shimai continued to sneer, if I remember correctly, you were wrapping your arms around the weeping Yun Shueisui's sleeve and were carefully comforting her, right? Dugu Haoran seemed to have guessed Yun Shimai's words, his pair of cold eyes narrowed slightly as he looked coolly at the bold woman in front of him. What do you want to do? Heh. Yun Shi Dance covered her mouth and laughed coldly, I don't want to do anything, I just want to know, if the emperor knows that his favored Lady Water concubine had an affair with King Jin, and brought him the biggest cuckold in the world, what will he think? Hashtag chapter 6, threaten him. Nonsense. Dugu Haoran gazed straight at Yun Shimai, the bottom of his eyes was monstrous anger, he only knew that she, the fifth young miss of the general's residence, had first-class skills in fooling around, but he didn't know that he also had the kung fu of destroying people's innocence. I am innocent with Lady Water concubine, how can it be that you can criticize me at will? Yun Shi Dance's lips hanging smile, I light cold, like winter ice lake, cold with a touch of cold, the prince and water concubine lady whether between innocence, not you say, not water concubine say, but the emperor say. The emperor said no, you are innocent, the emperor said there, you are adultery, one cannot live. Understand? Threaten him. Dugu Haoran's eyes swirled with bright anger as he said hatefully, Yun Shimai, you've really come out of the woodwork, and you've even done this kind of falsely accusing others. Yun Shi Dance smiled gently, clearly unimpressed by Dugu Haoran's anger, Dugu Haoran, you're not bad either, you even like your own sister-in-law, this kind of incestuous thing, I think you're the only one in the entire Tsangdao kingdom who can do it. You. Dugu Haoran was completely at his wit's end with Yun Shimai and flung his sleeves, what do you want? If the king does not come, I really cannot think of that day fell into the water thing, the king came, but reminded me. Tsk. Yun Shi Dancing lips, the bottom of the eyes gushed out a layer of cold frost, the right wife fell into the water, the husband does not help, this heart has not been able to get over this hurdle, your highness, you say I should how to punish you, in order to solve the hatred of my heart. Punishment? Yun Shi Dance went crazy. How dare you talk about punishing Dako Warang? Yun Shueisui's sleeve was dumbfounded, Red Lotus was dumbfounded, Lu Gu outside the door was dumbfounded, and even Dugu Haoran himself was dumbfounded. Yun Shi Dance which tendon is broken, it is simply not going out of the ordinary Yun Shue's sleeve looked at Yun Shi Dance incredulously, she thought that with Dako Haoran she could suppress this demon, she didn't expect that it would be contrary to her wishes, Dako Haoran was suppressed instead. This reversed and out-of-control scene, one must leave immediately. Thus, Yun Shueisui's sleeve hurriedly got up and said, as the king and his sister are dealing with family matters, it is inconvenient for this palace to be present, and since my sister is no longer in any serious trouble, then this palace will take its leave first. Yun Shueisui's sleeve raised her feet to leave, but Yun Shimai blocked her way. Sister, don't be in a hurry, you and I are sisters, since childhood our feelings are very good, my affairs are your affairs, my family affairs naturally have a sister's share. Most importantly, she was the director of this play, and if Yun Shi Dance was missing, then the play would not be sung. This. Yun Shueshi didn't expect her to come to this hand with herself, for a moment she didn't know whether to leave or stay, Yun Shimai simply pulled her wrist and directly pressed her back to the seat. Hashtag chapter 7, the cast is getting bigger and bigger, Yun Shimai, what exactly do you want, if you have any grievances? You charge at this king, don't take it out on water concubine, if there's any punishment, this king is willing to bear it all. Dugu Haoran clearly favored Yun Shue's sleeve. Yun Shimai lifted the corner of her lips, Your Highness, what can we do about this? If you didn't favor consort Shue so much, I would consider letting her off the hook, but you favor her like this consort is so jealous, this consort now wants to punish consort Shue first. You are unbelievable. Dugu Haoran was 10,000 times more annoyed, this Yun Shimai was obviously shifting the conflict, pointing all the spearheads at herself, this woman, was she still the same nymphomaniac from the past? Yes, I originally liked to act recklessly, none of the people of the Tsangdom kingdom know about it. Ah, your highness, your memory can't be so bad that you forgot. Yun Shi Dance looked at Dugu Haran with an innocent face, his eyes flashing with a fine light. Dugu Haran's eyes narrowed slightly, intense anger rolling in the bottom of his eyes. If you dare to touch a single hair on Princess Shui's head, this king will never settle with you. No matter who you are. Just then, the voice of Lu Gu came from outside the door. Slave servant, see the Empress Dowager. Lu Ji's voice was loud and seemed to be alerting the people in the room. Yun Shi Dance smiled slightly. She is really not easy as a director. Ah, the actors and actresses are getting more and more, if they do not perform the play properly, really sorry for the audience. Wooden, Yun Shi Dance's bottom of the eyes surged up a flash of essence, although a flash even, but still was seen by Dugu Haran. The cloudy sunset dance seems to have changed. Making a move on this concubine now? Is your highness sure? Yun Shi Dance raised her eyebrows and looked at Dugu Haran as if she was provocative. Dance child, I heard the palace maid said to hear your room in the voice. The Empress Dowager has not yet arrived. Sound first, see how worried about the physical health of Yun Shi Dance. The door to the house opened, and Yun Shimai pounced into the Empress Dowager's arms with a spring in her step, rubbing against her shoulder like a well-behaved cat. Auntie, Dancer thought she would never see you again. Seeing this, Yun Shui's sleeve couldn't help but clench her fists. The person who dared to speak to the Empress Dowager in such a tone of voice, looking at the Tsangdom country, I'm afraid that Yun Shimai was the only one. The Empress Dowager touched Yun Shi Dance's little head, dotingly said, Dance child, say what silly words it, how will not see the mourning family, you are the mourning family's precious niece, without the permission of the mourning family, the king of hell will never dare to accept you. Dugu Haran saw the situation, immediately the corner of his lip straight draw, only to feel 10,000 grass mud horses whistling past before his eyes. Ah, have wood. This woman, the role change was also too fast. What the hell did she do? He really wanted to tell the Empress Dowager about Yun Shimai's aggressive virtues just now, but he finally held back. At this time, the Empress Dowager also saw Dugu Haran and Yun Shui's sleeve in the room. Chapter 8, This is the Queen. The Empress Dowager's slightly sulky gaze swept towards the duo, her tone carrying a faint annoyance. Just now I heard the sound of arguing coming from the room. Was it you who made Dancer angry? Dugu Haran and Yun Shui's sleeves' two faces were stunned at the same time. Dugu Haran was just about to open his mouth to explain, when he heard Yun Shimai shaking the Empress Dowager's arm, pouting daintily, Auntie, we didn't quarrel just now, we just spoke a little louder, and if it's noisy Auntie, Duoer will make amends to Auntie on behalf of her husband and sister, so please don't be angry, okay? At this moment, standing not far away, Yun Shui's sleeve only felt a wave of anger attacking her heart. This nymphomaniac Yun Shimai, in the end, what is so good can make the Empress Dowager so protective. In terms of talent, in terms of beauty, she's no match for herself, so why can she get what she can't get? Shit. Upon hearing this, a smile finally appeared on the Empress Dowager's face as she clutched Yun Shimai's small hand with one hand and patted her on the back of her hand with the other. I'm just worried that you're being bullied, but our Dancer's heart is good and she's never been with anyone who's evil, so if there's really someone who bullies someone, that person should definitely be punished by the wrath of heaven. After listening to the Empress Dowager's words, Yun Shimai's eyes reddened, and her entire body nestled into the Empress Dowager's embrace. Well-behaved to the extreme, Meyer knew that Auntie loved Meyer the most. The Empress Dowager smiled gently and patted her shoulder. All are already big girls who have started their own families, still crying, won't they be laughed at? Yun Shimai slowly raised her head and smiled innocently. Without realizing it, she steeply met with Dugu Haran's icy cold sight. Yun Shimai provocatively raised her eyebrows. The look in her eyes seems to say, I'm going to tell you what it means to be a queen. You can be cute, play nice, and flexibly switch between roles, that's what a queen is. Understand? Dako Hao Ran was once again winded, who could tell him what Yunshi Dance had been smoking. Consort Shui, I still have something to say to King Jin, you should step back first. The Empress Dowager's tone was clear and cold, and she hadn't even looked at Yun Shui's sleeve since the beginning. Yes, Yun Shui's sleeve unwillingly withdrew, but suddenly heard the Empress Dowager call out behind her, wait. Does the Empress Dowager still have the proper orders for my servant? The courtesan beside you, I'm annoyed by what I see, reward her with 50 slaps and send her to serve in the inferior room. Yun Shuishi was slightly stunned, the Empress Dowager is giving herself a hard time. Red Lotus is her personal maid from the general's residence, and has been serving her closely for the past few years, and punishing Red Lotus is a warning to herself. But she couldn't argue, so she could only bow her head and say, yes, my servant obeys the decree. Yunshi Dance coldly smiled, ginger is really still old and spicy, do not need to waste their own efforts, the Empress Dowager will take the initiative to the Red Lotus this love upside down black and white hoofs to take care of. Hashtag chapter 9, and too narcissistic. Not to mention serving in the inferior room, I'm afraid that the 50 slaps would make her walk the ghost gate. After Yun Shui's sleeve retreated, the Empress Dowager was helped into the main seat by Yun Shimai, while Dugu Haran and Yun Shimai sat down indoors according to the order. The Empress Dowager drank a mouthful of clear tea, then said, King Jin, I know that you and Dancer have always been at odds. Upon hearing this, Dugu Haran immediately rose and cupped his fists, my son wouldn't dare. The Empress Dowager waved her hand, sit down, a family talking need not speak so much understanding, mourning family is old, but do not understand what you young people are thinking, but the mourning family thought, the family and all things are prospering, Jin Wang, you say is not it? Dekuro Hao Ran was silent, he didn't want to explain, moreover, he didn't want to explain. The Empress Dowager saw the situation, but was unable to say down, can only continue to gossip some of the family just, before leaving, the Empress Dowager gave the order, tomorrow morning, King Jin will be the Princess of Wang Fei received back to the residence to convalesce, and to take care of it personally, and tonight, King Jin must be lodged in the room of the Princess of Wang Fei. As soon as the Empress Dowager left, Dugu Haran immediately looked at Yun Shimai with contempt and snorted, how pretentious. Yun Shi Dance gently laughed and walked to the bedside, her whole body collapsed on the bed, looking resentfully at Dugu Haran, is the king praising me? What do you think? Oh, Yun Shimai smiled with her eyes narrowed into a heart, and said sincerely, if the king doesn't deny it, then I was praising me then. Countless black lines immediately slid down the top of Dako Horan's head, how could there be such a narcissist in the world? Yunshi Dance lay on her side on the bed, one arm supporting her head, her pretty face with a hint of a light smile, Your Highness, it's getting late, don't you want to go to bed? Dugu Haran's nerves flared, here it comes, Yun Shimai really can't resist the loneliness and wants to perform the rite of conjugal union with him. But he, Dugu Haran, was not so easily hooked. Are you so eager for the king to take your body? Yun Shimai blinked her clear eyes, and her two cherry-like lips picked up a good-looking arc, Your Highness, when did this consort say that she wanted to have a room with you? Dr. Haran was stunned for a moment, could it be a misunderstanding on his part? Didn't you just say? This consort only said to sleep, but she didn't say she wanted to sleep with you. Here, take it. As soon as the words fell, Dugu Haran saw Yun Shimai copied a quilt and threw it towards him, he grabbed it with his trusty hand and asked with a raised eyebrow, what do you mean by that? Not obvious enough. Yun Shi Dance smiled with a curved brow, but this smile looked in Dugu Haran's eyes, but it was a bit of a scalp-numbing feeling, what this consort means is that the king sleeps on the ground and this consort sleeps on the bed. Huh. Dugu Haran this time not only the corners of his mouth pumped, even his facial muscles pumped, this nymphomaniac, in the end, do you know what you're talking about, Sandao Kingdom's hallowed King Jin, want to sleep on the ground, what kind of behavior is that? Hashtag chapter 10, feeling aggrieved. Look at His Majesty, he doesn't seem too happy about it. What? Feeling aggrieved? Dugu Haran threw down the quilt in his hand and glared at Yun Shimai and said angrily, Yun Shimai, how dare you let this king sleep on the floor? Yun Shi Dance smiled shallowly, her eyes suddenly bright and dark. If the king seizes the door now, I'm afraid the Empress Dowager will be blamed, but compared to this consort's bed and couch, the king should prefer the feeling of sleeping on the ground. Hey, the king consider it by himself, whether to sleep on the bed or underground. This consort is so tired today, I'm going to sleep first. After speaking, Yun Shi Dance looked like Dugu Haran didn't exist and directly collapsed on the bed and huffed and puffed. On the opposite side, Dugu Haran's entire face froze. It took a while to calm the anger in his heart. Well, good men don't fight with women. This time, he'll let her have 3 points. After comforting himself, Dugu Haran picked up the quilt on the ground and spread it on the ground. The whole person tripped up, but only lay down for a while. Dugu Haran suddenly came back to his senses. How did he always have a kind of feeling that he was counted by this nymphomaniac? By what right does she decide who sleeps in the bed and who sleeps on the ground, and by what right does he have to listen to her and lie obediently on the ground? All this is based on what? Early the next morning, Yun Shimai got up from her bed and stretched her back greatly. Her whole body was refreshed. When Lu Gu heard the commotion inside, she immediately came in with a water basin, but saw a long bedding roll rolled up on the floor. Lu Gu was puzzled and asked, Your Highness, what is this thing? Dugu Haran has always been a light sleeper, coupled with the hard ground. He didn't close his eyes for the entire night. He knew it from the moment he hit Lu Gu to come in, and when he heard Lu Gu say that, he immediately rolled out of the bedding roll. What the hell are you talking about? You're the thing. As soon as Lu Gu saw that it was Dugu Haran, she immediately knelt on the ground and fearfully said, Wang, Your Highness atone for your sins. Slave girl didn't mean to offend, please forgive the slave girl. Yun Shi Dance on the bed comfortably slept all night, plus the Empress Dowager took care of the Red Lotus. The mood was great. Bad Smile got out of bed, slowly helped Lu Gu up, word by word, clear, word by word, said, Remember, in the future, don't care about the king called things, because the king is not a thing. Understand? Click. Yun Shi Dance's words were like a clap of thunder, splitting Dugu Haran in an external awe. His big hand held the foot of the bed in time, so as not to be thundered down by the words of Yun Shimai. Water and Moon Palace. Yun Shui's sleeve was combing her makeup in front of the mirror, when a eunuch came over to report, Your Highness, Lady Shui, last night Hong Lian couldn't help the pain of her broken leg and has bitten her tongue to kill herself. At those words, Yun Shui's hand that clutched the hairpin abruptly tightened. Damn Yun Shimai, causing her to lose a capable stopper. Hashtag Chapter 11, A Chance for Nymphomania. Hashtag The eunuch saw the anger on Yun Shui's face and said, Your Highness, please don't worry about it. Around Honglian is also a person with a broken leg, and she won't be able to be of much use in the future, and she died by herself, which also saves us from having to work hard. Yun Shui's sleeves clenched hand slowly loosened, the bottom of her eyes steeply flashed with a touch of ruthlessness. Yun Shimai, this palace will never cheapen you like this. Heiko, where is that nymphomaniac now? Back to Your Highness, I am going to the Empress Dowager's palace with King Jin to have breakfast, but I have heard from my slave that the Emperor has declared King Jin to go to the Imperial Study Room to deliberate after breakfast. Yun Shui's sleeve smiled coldly and gently inserted the hairpin in her hand on her head. King Jin's absence had given her the opportunity to settle that philanderer. If this palace remembers correctly, there is a stretch of road from the palace to King Jin's residence that is very secluded, right? Xiao Haizi's eyes flashed. What does the queen mean? That bitch, this palace has had enough. Little Haizi, it's time for those friends of yours outside the palace to come in handy. Yes, slave will do it. Xiao Haizi exited the inner hall. Yun Shui's sleeve's face suddenly twisted up with some hideousness. Yun Shi Dance, last time, you counted on your life, and this time, this palace doesn't believe that you will have such a good life. After Yun Shimai and Duge Haran had a simple breakfast in the Empress Dowager's palace, one of them took the carriage back to King Jin's mansion, while the other followed the order and went to the imperial study room. Yun Shimai sat on the carriage and lifted the curtain to look at the scenery outside. It had to be said that the Tsangdong country was really an economically prosperous country. Not only the economy, but even the exchanges with other countries were very smooth and developed, and the foreigners who came to the Tsangdong country to sell supplies could be seen everywhere. Yun Shi-dance smiled gently. In such an economically developed country, with her own business acumen and vision, she believed that she would soon be able to fight her way out of the world, only that before starting her own business, she had to get hold of a certain amount of money. But she doesn't even have a single hair in her hand right now, so what can she do to gather funds? Suddenly, her eyes flashed and she slammed her head. How could she forget that when Yun Shueisui's sleeve married into the palace, her father had given her 4 stores as dowry? But she couldn't let Yun Shueisui's sleeve hand over the store to herself, unless she was crazy. While she was agonizing over this matter, Yun Shi-dance suddenly realized that the flow of people outside the carriage was getting thinner and thinner, and in the end, it even reached an empty alley in the middle of nowhere. Yun Shimai's eyes flickered slightly as she rushed at Lu Gu, who was following outside the car, and asked, "What place is this?" Lu Gu laughed, "Your Highness, this is the 9 Turns Lane, a necessary route back to the royal residence." Yun Shimai raised her eyebrows suspiciously. 9 Turns Lane. "Yes, this alley has 9 turns, hence the name," Lu Gu explained. Yun Shi-dance nodded, but her dark eyes looked into the distance. For some reason, she always felt that this alley had a somewhat eerie and terrifying atmosphere, and there was a feeling of a mountain rain. Chapter 12, These Killers Are Weak. Suddenly, Yun Shi-dance only saw an extremely tiny prism of light flying towards her. Her eyes had coldness flashing through them. This was clearly a concealed weapon. Yun Shi-dance subconsciously turned around. Dozens of silver needles broke through the curtains and directly stuck on the inner wall of the carriage. Just out of the palace door, the danger followed. Their own last life in the end. What sin even crossed into this nymphomaniac body. Yun Shi-dance has no time to think about it, because she has already heard the whooshing sound around her. That is clearly the sound of concealed weapons flying in the air, and it is still several times more than just a moment ago. Yun Shi-dance quickly slumped to the ground, only to see silver needles flying past her head. The fact that these killers didn't attack anyone else but her proved that they were targeting themselves, but the fact that so many hidden weapons couldn't hit her also showed that these killers were weak. Against such weak-minded people, of course, the most weak-minded method should be used. With a flash of her eyes, Yun Shi-dance weakly shouted, Lu Gu. Lu Gu. Quickly come to save me, save me. Lu Gu, a jolt, immediately ordered the horseman to stop. He quickly jumped on the car, lifted the curtain to see, immediately sucked in a mouthful of cool air, only to see silver needles sticking everywhere in the car. Yun Shi-dance is collapsed on the ground, full of pale face. "Your Highness, what's wrong with you? What's wrong?" Lu Gu picked up Yun Shimai and shouted. Who knows, the next second, Yun Shimai's face changed, reached out to cover Lu Ji's mouth, and ordered the outwardly facing horseman in a cold voice, "Drive back to the mansion, be quick." When the horseman heard this, he swung his long whip, and the horse hissed as it ran towards the Jin Wang mansion. None. Lu Gu looked at Yun Shi-dance in horror. Her body instinctively struggled. Yun Shi-dance's sharp eyes swept. Lu Ji's body was frozen as if it was frozen, all stiff. As for the outside of the car, several men dressed in rough linen clothes finally stopped due to physical exhaustion after chasing for some time. Several people panted and looked at each other, and someone asked, "Boss, Chase, can't catch up. What can we do about this?" The leader narrowed his eyes and said, "If we can't catch up, we can't catch up. What else can we do? Can't we chase them to King Jin's palace? Then how are we going to explain to the palace? You guys, you're all elm brains, didn't you hear that girl screaming just now? That proves that Yun Shi dance has been poisoned. There is no antidote for this kind of poison except in the palace. She will die for sure. Let's go. Afterwards, several men scurried down the alley a few times and eventually disappeared. Returning to the royal residence, Yun Shimai put away the silver needle in the car, only to see that the tip of the needle had a faint black color. This needle was poisonous. On the other hand, Lu Gu on the side was cold at the soles of her feet. How could her Wang Fei be so plagued with disasters? Just after walking from the ghost gate, someone else is victimizing the Wang Fei. Hashtag chapter 13, it's getting really strange. Hashtag, Your Highness, what kind of people are trying to harm you? Lu Gu asked. Yun Shimai's eyes glowed with cold light. This consort doesn't know either, but this consort can make this poison needle talk. Your Highness, Lu Gu doesn't understand. Yun Shi Dance smiled coldly, handed a silver needle to Lu Gu, and said indifferently, find a stable doctor to see what kind of poison is on the top, and what symptoms the poison will have. Go. Yes. Lu Gu walked out a few steps, then suddenly turned back. Your Highness, should we tell His Highness about today's matter? Yun Shimai didn't even think about it and directly waved her hand. No need. Lu Gu lowered her eyelids and silently walked out, but the cloud of doubt in her heart could never fade away. The crown princess is really getting stranger and stranger. In just half an hour, Lu Gu rushed back from outside. Your Highness, the slave girl inquired about it. This poison is called half-moon immortal. The poisoned person will be weak, lethargic, not thinking about food and drink. After half a month will die a violent death, and completely unable to find out the toxin in the body. However, the half-moon fairy is very rare, and not everyone can afford to use it. Yun Shi Dance's eyes narrowed and smiled coldly, not realizing that those killers were not very capable, but the originator behind them was using a big hand. The half-moon immortal was so famous, so that meant that the person who wanted his life was also a person with plenty of money. A man's name calls out. Yun Shi Dance looked solemn, the bottom of the eyes dead. Ancient wells generally deep cannot see the bottom. Lu Gu, put out the wind. This consort that day after falling into the water fell into the root of the disease. After returning to the house, the stubborn disease lingers on. Yes. Without asking more questions, Lu Gu immediately retreated. Yun Shi Dance frowned. Someone seems to be impatient to want their own life. However, this half-moon fairy is bound to be poisoned within half a month, and I think the person behind the curtain Han quickly will automatically show up. By then, not only would she be able to fix that scum, but even the money problem that had been bothering her would be solved. In the meantime, a corner of the Yangxin Hall, a chessboard on a high platform, although it is daytime, but around the 8 lanterns, the chessboard will shine extraordinarily bright. The eunuch beside the emperor, Gao Tu, let out a light laugh and said, Your Majesty's chess skills are indeed first class in the world, but after dropping 10 pawns, he has defeated King Jin. Regarding Gao Tu's words, Dugu Haotian didn't care, but instead landed his sharp gaze on Dugu Haoran. It seems that King Jin didn't have a good night's sleep last night, so today's play is off par. Dugu Haoran laughed, helplessly shook his head. Imperial brother Wen Taomusher, everything is better than my brother. Even this chess kung fu, let my brother can't hope to catch up. Imperial brother cannot find my brother to play chess again, otherwise my brother can be really faced to go back to see the father and mother of Jiangdong. Hashtag chapter 14, a game of chess is like a game of war. Hashtag Dugu Haotian's originally deep gaze became even deeper, lightly raising his eyebrows. I don't think that King Jin's ability is limited to this. It seems like he is deliberately letting me off the hook. Dugu Haoran was slightly stunned, then said, Imperial brother is joking. You also know my brother. My brother has no great ambition. The biggest goal is to be able to spend a leisurely day, 3 meals without worry, since childhood, my brother, which is comparable to Imperial brother. Dugu Haotian laughed aloud. The dark current under his eyes seemed to have become calm and wave-free in an instant. Since your younger brother is like this, then I will give you a lifetime of glory, so that you can live this life without any worries. Many thanks to Imperial Brother for completing this. Dugu Haran walked off the high platform and respectfully thanked him. A family of brothers don't need to be so formal, come, accompany me to play another game. Dugu Haran got up, just wanted to walk up to the high platform, but heard a eunuch's shrill voice coming from the doorway, Your Majesty, just now the servant girl of King Jin's residence came to pass the message, saying that the Wangfei can't make it. Upon hearing this, Dugu Haran's eyebrows clustered. She was fine during the morning meal, but now she is not fine. What kind of plotting and scheming is that woman playing again? On the contrary, it was Dugu Hautian. His face showed a look of anxiety, since the crown princess is suffering from an emergency, then King Jin should hurry back. Yes. Dugu Haran swiftly walked out of the nurturing heart hall. Looking at Dugu Haran's departing back, Dugu Hautian's eyes were frosty. Your Majesty, King Jin doesn't seem to have the intention of plotting a rebellion, Your Majesty can rest easy. On the side, Gao Tu said softly. Dugu Hautian lightly hummed, turned his eyes, looked toward the chess game is already dead. Will Dugu Haran's side of a white child gently a move, the chess game immediately produced a heaven and earth changes, white actually prevailed. Gao Tu's unbelievably wide-eyed, Your Majesty, this. Dugu Hautian sneered, picking up the black discs into his hands one by one. Gao Tu, you don't understand, the chess game is like a war game, every move should not only think of attacking, but also think of defending and counterattacking. It is more important to think about defense and counterattack. From the time Dugu Haran dropped the first white piece, he has already laid down a bloody battle without smoke. Your Majesty, that King Jin he. Give me a good eye on Consort Shui, every move over there should be reported to me in time. Between Dugu Hautian's black eyes suddenly rolled up shocking waves that seemed to devour everything. Dugu Haran and him grew up together since childhood, his nature himself knows very well, as long as he has Yun Shui's sleeve in his hands as a chess piece, then, Dugu Haran can't roll up much of a storm. When Dugu Haran rushed back to the mansion, he could only hear Lu Ji's deafening cries that made the ground in a 10-mile radius of King Jin's mansion tremble. Wang Fei you can't die if you die the slave girl can do which. Wang Fei, take Lu Gu together, Lu Gu go down to serve you, ow. I dropped that Wang Fei hashtag chapter 15, is the princess dead? The closer Dugu Haran approached Yunshi Dance's courtyard, the more his temples jutted out. How come he hadn't realized in the past that Lu Gu also had the skill to give people a funeral run? What are you crying for? Is the princess dead? Icy cold voice into the ear, Lu Gu turned around, saw Dugu Haran with a frosty face striding in, immediately stopped crying, sobbing, Your Highness, the princess is not well. Dugu Haran walked in, only to see Yun Shimai lying on the bed, her eyes closed tightly, without a trace of blood on her face, and her lips were cracked with several wounds because they were too dry. What the hell is going on? Wasn't it fine in the morning? Your Highness do not know, the princess where is well, that is clearly hard to hold it, the princess in the carriage cannot. Oh. Wang Fei is really poor, fell into the water not to mention, but also fell sick. Wang Fei you have a bitter life yo. Lu Gu a snot and a tear complained about the misery of the cloud she dance, the bed of the cloud she dance almost laugh spray, this Lu Gu, very talented well, in the future, if the use of the right, will become their right-hand man. And Dugu Haran's eardrums are almost shattered by this crying, he rubbed his numb eardrums, his tone was very impatient, if you have a disease, go and ask a doctor, what can you do if you just cry here? Oh. Slave girl has already invited the doctor, what's even more pathetic is that the doctor also said that the Wang Fei is hopeless, oh. Dugu Haran raised his eyes to look at Yun Shimai, he couldn't find the slightest break in the disguise on her face, but he always felt that there was something fishy about this matter in his heart. This Yunshi dance, ever since she fell into the water, she had become very evil, and she could not catch herself at all. Alright, Lu Gu, pass on this king's order to ask the palace imperial physician to come and treat the crown princess. His eyes skimmed over Yun Shimai's face, without a trace of pity under his eyes. Dugu Haran turned around to leave, but Yun Shimai's voice, which was weak to the core, came from behind him. Is it the king? Dugu Haran turned his head back, only to see Yun Shimai's pair of eyes that had lost their vigor were looking at him, her open 5 fingers slowly reaching towards him, like a person who had fallen into the water trying to grab a life-saving straw. The king, the king. The king. Yun Shimai's corners of her eyes slid down 2 drops of clear tears, her voice hoarse and weak, her shaky body leaning as far as possible towards Dugu Haran. But Dugu Haran was simply indifferent. After last night, he hated to thwart this demon in front of him. Where would he still reach out to help her? Seeing this situation, Dugu Haran's side strategist Night Fae immediately said, "Your Highness, now that the news of the One Fae's serious illness has been spread throughout the city, the Empress Dowager is afraid that she has also heard of it, if your Highness does not treat the One Fae well, so that the One Fae has a long and short, I'm afraid that the Empress Dowager will be blamed for it." Chapter 16, What an Injustice. Dugu Haran lowered his eyelids, a ghostly cold face. He had always thought that he had a hole in the world and was completely in the palm of his hand, but this time, he was like the Monkey King. Yun Shimai was like Buddha Rulai. No matter how much he tossed and turned, he was unable to escape from the clutches of this demon. What an injustice! Helplessly, Dugu Haran could only force himself to walk over and reach out to pull Yun Shimai's small hand, but something unexpected happened, only to see Yun Shimai flip her palm and open Dugu Haran's hand with a snap. Dugu Haran gave Yun Shimai an unbelievable look. Yun Shimai's pale lips slightly picked up, revealing a sickly but with a small flirtatious smile, "Your Highness." Concubine. Concubine just wanted you to pour a glass of water. Dako Horan looked at Yun Shimai in surprise, and his hand that had been hit would be completely in place. Only to see that Yun Shi Dance's eyes were as pure as a clear spring, without a trace of impurities, clearly not telling lies. Cough cough. Dugu Haran dryly coughed twice to hide his embarrassment, then very calmly withdrew his hand, coldly looked at Yun Shi Dance, and sternly said, "To drink water won't you let Lu Gu pour it? Why must this king serve you?" Yun Shi Dance's gaze a beat, raised his eyes to look at Dugu Haran, a mournful face. "Wang, the king. One day husband and wife, you and I husband and wife for a year, although not in the same bed, is the concubine to let the king pour a cup of water, the king is not willing to do." Cough cough cough. Before the words were finished, Yun Shi Dance's breathing steeply shortened, her chest felt like it was blocked by a stone. How could she not breathe normally, and her face was even several times paler than just now. "Yun Shimai, what happened to you?" Dugu Haran was immediately startled. Is this woman really fake? Her vitality is so fragile to this extent. "Doctor. Lu Gu, quickly go into the palace to find a doctor." Night Flight immediately ordered Lu Gu loudly, then ran to the table and poured a cup of water and handed it to Dugu Haran. Dugu Haran held Yun Shimai with one hand, and held a cup of water in the other hand to feed her water, but Yun Shimai had only taken a sip of water when she was choked and coughed, and in the end, she even coughed up blood. What's going on here? Hey, Yun Shi Dance, are you serious? You won't die just like that, right? Dugu Haran was nervous and a bit incoherent. He just didn't understand why he could be calm and unruffled in the face of Dugu Hautian's aggressiveness, but in the face of Yun Shimai who was about to die, he was nervous and messed up. As soon as Dugu Haran's words fell, Yun Shimai puffed out a stream of blood, all of it sprayed on Dugu Haran's body. At this moment, Dugu Haran felt like he was about to go berserk. Who could tell him what he should do now? Chapter 17 The end is near. Nightfly, where's the doctor? Why hasn't the doctor come yet? The Kuro Hao Ran questioned loudly. Your Highness, Lu Gu has already gone to invite. I believe the doctor is on his way at this time. Please be patient, Your Highness. Nightfly replied carefully. Patience? Do you think the king has patience now? Dugu Haren's gaze steeply became cold and gloomy. Nightfly's face stiffened and immediately realized the mistake made. The fact that he could accompany Dugu Haren meant that he was wise beyond his years. Even though he couldn't even compare to a single hair of Dugu Haren's head, his wisdom was still very much recognizable, but he was now making a fatal mistake. That was to talk about reason with someone who had lost his mind. "Please be at ease, Your Highness, my subordinate will go to the door to meet you." After saying that, Nightfly quickly ran towards the door. Sure enough, in just 2 minutes of work, a white-bearded imperial physician ran in sweating profusely, followed by Nightfly and Lu Gu. As soon as the imperial physician saw Dugu Haren, he was about to salute, but Dugu Haren waved his hand and said, "No need, quickly check the princess's pulse." "Yes." The imperial physician walked up and was shocked at the sight of Yun Shimai's pale face. "Oh my god, the crown princess is not going to live long." After hearing this, Lu Gu immediately raised her voice and said, "What are you talking about? How can my princess not have a long life? You haven't checked your pulse yet." The imperial doctor said seriously and gravely, "I have been practicing medicine for decades. One look at the face and I can tell that the princess does not have much time left. The princess is suffering from the most serious cold disease. This kind of disease, not to mention the old man, even if it is what Tua in the world may not be able to cure ah." "What?" Flo Girl collapsed and paralyzed on the floor, bawling her eyes out. And aside, Dugu Haren was slightly stunned. He was stunned to look at the dying Yun Shimai on the bed, and for the first time there was a faint color of pity in his gaze. Although she was bossy and nymphomaniac, but he could see that her nature is not bad. At least in the royal family this year, she did not take the initiative to harm others. In the Ui Guile, competing for power in the officialdom of the royal family, like her, such a pure nature of the person has been very few and far between. Just because he didn't like her, and even purposely coldly ignored her, didn't mean he wanted her dead. Is there no other way? Hearing this, Yun Shimai on the bed gently raised her eyebrows. Dugu Haren didn't want to let himself die. She thought that if she died, he would organize a feast and celebrate for 3 days and 3 nights in heaven. Why was his tone so mournful? The imperial physician shook his head helplessly. "This illness of the crown princess came too quickly. Forgive me for my lack of talent and knowledge, there is really no way to cure it." Compassion flickered on Dekuro Hojo's face. Lowering his eyelids, Dugu Haren waved his hand. "All of you go down. This king has some things to say to the princess." Chapter 18, The plot succeeds. The other 3 retired. Dugu Haren slowly walked to the bedside, gently sat down. The bed, Yun Shi Dance quietly lying there, the small face without a trace of expression. It is difficult to imagine, such a dying person will be the same as last night's teasing their own woman is the same person. Can be said, Yun Shi Dance is also considered a beauty, just her beauty in cloud. Yun Shui's sleeve is different. Yun Shui's sleeve's beauty is stunning, the beauty is threatening and aggressive, while Yun Shu Dance is like a small family, the little sister next door in general, sweet and lovely. Let a person look at the comfort. Dugu Haren sighed. "Yun Shimai, you shouldn't marry this king. If you don't marry this king, maybe you'll be much happier than you are now." "King, Your Highness." Yun Shi Dance slowly opened her eyes, a flash of light flashed under her eyes. "Concubine." Concubine never regretted it. "It's just that, now that I'm about to die, can. Please ask Your Highness to stay with my concubine and let my concubine die in peace." Dugu Haren thought for a moment and finally nodded his head. "Promise." He didn't notice that just at the moment he nodded his head, the corners of Yun Shimai's lips gently rose, revealing a conspiratorial smile, but she was a little strange. Why did Dugu Haren agree so painfully? It was truly unthinkable. In the evening, Lu Gu took advantage of Dugu Haren to go out for the evening meal, and immediately ran to the house, jogged to the side of Yun Shi Dance, and softly called, "Wang Fei, Wang Fei." Yun Shi Dance opened her languid eyes, and saw that it was Lu Gu, and rolled over and leaped from the bed to the ground, stretching her arms and legs, pretending to be sick for a day, and her whole body was stiff. Of illness, her whole body was stiff. Lu Gu, did you bring the stuff? The slave girl brought it. Lu Gu took out a small paper bag from her bosom and gently opened it. Inside was a small black pill. Dr. Lin said, this medicine is taken once a day. In order to prevent disclosure, the slave girl goes to his pharmacy every day to collect it. The pill in the flowing singer was called Lust Disease Dan, and after taking it, one would have the symptoms of chills. Aha! Yun Shi Dance nodded, picked up the pill and swallowed it. Remember, act carefully and don't let anyone find out. Wang Fei, don't worry, right now the entire royal residence is surrounding you, where else would anyone care about the slave girl? Ah. Lu Gu laughed for a moment, then couldn't help but say, Wang Fei is seriously ill today. Slave girl sees that the king is very worried. I think, the king may not be completely heartless towards the princess. Yun Shi Dance gently crossed her lips and a cold smile crossed the corner of her lips. His little bit of insignificant concern simply can't make up for the mockery I've received and the indifference I've encountered over the years. Lu Gu was slightly stunned and seemed to understand something. Your Highness, then the slave girl will retire first. Lu Gu. What else does Wang Fei command? Yun Shimai's eyes darkened slightly. If you don't agree with what I'm doing, I can give you some silver money and release you from the mansion. Hashtag Chapter 19, make that man's life worse than death. Lu Gu immediately knelt on the ground, tears welled up under her eyes. Wang Fei, you have taken in the slave girl since you were a child. You are the slave girl's regenerative parent. Even if you let the slave girl go up the mountain of swords and down the sea of fire, the slave girl will never be ambivalent. I only beg the Wang Fei not to drive the slave girl away. Yun Shimai walked over and picked up Lu Gu. Lu Gu, if you want to follow this consort has to warn you first. The road ahead will be incredibly treacherous and exciting. Are you sure your heart can withstand it? Lu Gu firmly nodded. From last night to this morning, slave girl has experienced too much that she didn't experience in the past. In a short period of time, slave girl has already practiced an indestructible heart. Please don't worry, Your Highness. Yun Shi Dance patted Lu Ji's shoulder and said in a serious tone, well, this consort believes in you. Right at this moment, footsteps suddenly came from outside the door. Yun Shi Dance immediately lay back on the bed, while Lu Gu quickly wiped away her tears and respectfully stood by the bedside, using a cotton ball to dab the water on Yun Shi Dance's lips bit by bit. A woman who had been carefully dressed up nonchalantly pushed the door in, and seeing the sickly Yun Shimai, the corner of her lips hooked out a cold smile. My younger sister heard that my sister was seriously ill, and came to take a look. Yun Shi Dance half squinted her eyes. What she saw was a woman with a plump figure and enchanting posture. Her memory told her that her name was Lan Duo, the second lady of the royal family, and the woman who was currently the real power in the royal family. Indugu Haran married himself at the same time also married Blue Duoer as a side consort, and Night stayed in the side consort room, which is clearly to Yun Shi Dance face, but Yun Shi Dance but do not take it for granted, frequent design close to Dugu Haran, so that the Dugu Haran more and more disgusted with her. Yun Shimai's eyes were cold. In her mind, suddenly surfaced the clip of Lan Duoer tripping on herself in her normal life. The smile at the corner of Yun Shi Dance's lips was even colder. Since the wrongdoer had already come to her door, then she was bound to take out the spirit of bright sword to repair and fix these crooked neck trees. So it's sister who has come. Quickly please sit down. Lu Gu, help this consort up. In the face of Yun Shi Dance's weak state, Lan Dui sat on the opposite side of the table and just laughed coldly. This nymphomaniac will finally have to die. As long as she died, the position of the rightful consort would be her own. However, as long as she thought about the next period of time, the king would have to accompany this nymphomaniac all day and night, while she could only be accompanied by a green lamp at night. She hated her teeth. Yun Shimai, you're almost dead and you still don't forget to seduce. Lure the king, lowly. Her heart burning with anger, Lan Duoer even skipped the step of saluting and sat directly on the chair. What's wrong with sister? Is it possible that, after falling into the lotus pond, the king not only did not take pity on her, but also left her sister to fend for herself, and her worrying led to the malignant chills. Chapter 20, Trying to Hold Me Back. Knowing that she was sick and still ridiculing her words, it was obvious that she wanted to die early. Yun Shi Dance half leaned on the bed, her eyes were calm, the corners of her pale lips slightly picked up. Sister is extremely right, sister has been in the government for a year, but the king has never stepped into this consort's courtyard for half a step. On the contrary, it's the younger sister, one person who is monopolizing the color of the spring. The king stayed in the younger sister's courtyard night after night. Let this consort see it really hot eyes. Blue Duoer smiled proudly, the bottom of her eyes flashed contempt. In fact, earlier sister also advised the king to visit sister here from time to time, but the king did not allow it, saying that the sister dress is more appropriate than the sister sum. The depths of Yun Shi Dance's black eyes flashed through a flash of essence that was not easy for people to notice. She lightly coughed twice and softly returned, yes, this consort is indeed not very suitable for serving the king, and now she is not long for life, so, in the future, the heavy responsibility of waiting for the king will all fall on the younger sister. Randall's smile became even more complacent, but she always felt that today's Yun Shi Dance was strange. Could it be because she was about to die? There was also that smile on her face, it clearly looked light and gentle, but she was unconsciously sweating and her heart was fuzzy. Forget it, a nymphomaniac is just a nymphomaniac, it's not worth spending so much effort on herself. Thank you sister for caring, serving His Majesty is what concubines are meant to do, even if they are tired, they are willing to do so. Yun Shi Dance nodded, gratified smile, sister has this heart, this consort is relieved, but this consort also have to remind sister, and this consort the same day to enter the house. Now there is also a year, the king night and day favor, how come you do not see the sister's stomach has a movement it? Although the prince is not compared to the emperor, to heir continuous, but also to have a heir is not, if the sister regeneration is not a child, I'm afraid that the empress dowager her old man will have to be anxious it. Randall was stunned. Although she was deeply loved by Duge Haran, if she didn't have any more children, even if she smoothly ascended to the throne of the rightful consort after Yun Shimai's death, the empress dowager might one day stuff a whole bunch of women into the royal palace to serve the king, and then her position as the rightful consort would be in jeopardy. Blue Duoer's face a burst of green and white, she originally wanted to come to this angry Yun Shi Dance, give her a dose of fierce medicine, directly will be angry with her, but did not expect, but let her Jedi counterattack, painless a few words just poked their own soft underbelly. What's wrong? Why does sister's face look even worse than this consort's? It doesn't matter if you don't have an heir, as long as you are in power, no one in the entire household will dare to bully you. In power? If her stomach didn't move again, the more she was in power, the more she would be targeted. Seeing that Randall just lowered her head and didn't say anything, the aside Lu Gu had to sincerely admire his master, good formidable personality charm even shocked Randall couldn't say a word. Suddenly, Lon Duoer stood up, pointing her finger at Yun Shimai, her voice raising in pitch, Yun Shimai, you're dead to the world and you still want to use these words to hold me back, dream on. I definitely won't fall for your tricks. Yun Shimai blinked innocently, sister, what's wrong with you? Just now you were talking properly, why did you suddenly start a fire? Don't think I don't know what kind of flowery thoughts you have in your stomach, you're jealous that I've gained the king's favor, jealous that I'm lower in status than you but more favored than you, so you want to use the child to hold me back and keep me busy. Yun Shimai, you're so precise in your thoughts, but you've miscalculated, I'm not as stupid as you think. Even less like you, a nymphomaniac. As soon as Randall's words fell, Yun Shi Dance spat out a mouthful of blood with a poof. Chapter 21, You Can't Be Killed. And just then, Duge Haran happened to enter the door. Lon Duoer first screamed, and when she saw Duge Haran's gloomy and angry face, the horror that filled her face suddenly turned into panic. King, your highness. Why are you here? You didn't go. Lon Duoer said halfway through her sentence, suddenly realized that something was wrong, and hurriedly stopped her mouth. In fact, her servant girl had already inquired clearly. Duguharan went out directly after the evening meal to seek a doctor for Yunshi dance. How could he come back so quickly? Duguharan's face was full of frost, quickly walking to Yunshi dance, supporting her shaky body, gazing at Lan Dui with a fixed eyebrow. You do know this king's whereabouts like the back of your hand. But fortunately this king turned back in the middle of the journey, otherwise, I would not have known that you, blue-side concubine, had so much guts that you dared to be disrespectful to the right honorable consort. Blue Duor was so scared that she knelt on the ground, her body trembled like a sieve. This is the first time that Duguharan is angry with her, she must be careful to deal with it, otherwise, her favor will be the end today. Your Highness understand, my concubine did not mean to hit the princess, my concubine was just in a hurry, said the wrong words, please forgive your Highness, the princess forgive all. Your Highness. Cough. Yunshi dance lowly called out, I just spoke with my sister about the matter of the heir, my sister has not been able to conceive your Highness child anxiously. I have been unable to conceive a child for His Majesty, so I was anxious, so I was inevitably agitated, so please don't take it to heart, your Highness. Heir. Duguharan's brows turned cold. Every time after he went to Lan Duor's courtyard, he would order an underling to send a bowl of contraceptive soup. Of course, the underling would say that it was a tonic soup personally rewarded by the king. It seemed that Lan Duor had stored a different mind. Seeing the chill in his eyes, Yunshi dance's eyes moved slightly. Sure enough, she guessed correctly that Lan Duor's failure to conceive all this time had something to do with Duguharan. Duguharan had loved Yun Shueishui's sleeve for more than 10 years, Lan Duor in his eyes, was just a cheap servant girl who warmed the bed, and apart from Yun Shue's sleeve, how could he allow another woman to give birth to his heir? Duguharan waved his hand, his tone solemn and cold. Blue-side consort rushed the princess, grounded for a month. Without this king's order, no one is allowed to let her out. Your Highness, don't Your Highness, don't. Concubine knows it's wrong. 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 Blue Duor was full of unwillingness and was dragged down by the 2 house guards, her mournful cries were endless. After dealing with Blue Duor, Duguharan raised his hand and signaled Lu Gu to go out and close the door behind him, and then his entire body sat down beside Yun Shimai, with one hand still intimately resting on her shoulder. Yun Shimai stared at her eyebrows, such an intimate move, it was the first time for them all. There was no way she was stupid enough to think that Duguharan had suddenly made a shocking turnaround in this instant and fell in love with herself like crazy. Dako Horan, what kind of drugs are you selling? As a matter of fact, Yun Shimai didn't like Duguharan's sudden closeness, this kind of atmosphere was annoying to her. Being lost in thought for a moment, Duguharan's soft voice suddenly came from her ears, Wang Fei, in the past it was this king who treated you poorly, you won't hold a grudge against this king, right? Yun Shimai raised her eyebrows, and without a trace, she took his hand that was beating on her shoulder down and held it in her hand. Greedily rubbing it twice, no, of course not, as long as the king accompanies my concubine day after day, my concubine is willing to die. Duguharan frowned his long brows, jerked out his hand, then moved away, pulling away from Yun Shi dance, his eyes no longer looking at her, cough cough, this king has occasional wind cold, he can't get too close to the concubine, don't let the concubine catch the disease. It doesn't matter, anyway, my concubine is also a dying person, what is the wind chill, even more serious disease my concubine doesn't care, your highness, come on, Yun Shimai rushed to Duguharan and waved her hand, her tone was full of expectation. The next second, Duguharan eyebrows knit more tightly. Yun Shi dance in the heart sneer, she did not guess wrong, Duguharan really have a ghost in his heart is fundamentally not Yun Shi dance. No need, if the princess has a good or bad, this king's heart will not be at peace in this life, let's sit like this. Sitting with Yun Shi dance. Just thinking about it, Duguharan felt his scalp tingle. Your highness. Yun Shimai sniffled, you are really too good to my concubine. Although Yun Shimai's face was moved to cry, but in her heart, she couldn't help but slander, Mom's egg. You didn't treat this girl as a meat and potatoes, this girl also treats you as a rotten egg. Dugu Haoran draws the corners of his mouth, always feeling that Yun Shimai's tears are hypocritical. Simply caring for a few sentences, Dugu Haoran got up to leave, walked to the door, but there suddenly stopped his feet, half sighed over his face, some clear and cold said, the Empress Dowager and General Yun already know about your condition, a few days later will come to visit, at that time, you know what to say. As the words fell, Dugu Haoran got up and left. Yun Shi Dance blinks her eyes in understanding, so that's why, no wonder Dugu Haoran would suddenly act so close to himself, so it's in order to appease himself and not allow himself to complain in front of the Empress Dowager and the General's old man. Oh, Dugu Haoran, you are so calculating. Knowing that Yun Shimai's life is not long to go, once she passes away, the Empress Dowager and General Yun will surely link Yun Shimai's death with the cold treatment she received in the royal residence this year, and at that time, the general will be in trouble in the imperial court, and the Empress Dowager will reprimand her as an elder, and he will suffer from the anger both inside and outside, and he will surely suffer from a hard time. When Dugu Haoran left, Lu Gu hurriedly ran in, Your Highness, why did the king leave? His feet are on him, if he wants to go, I can still stop him. Lu Gu nodded with relief. Wang Fei, when the king went out, he said that he would stay in the courtyard side room, so if you have anything, the king can be the first to know. Yun Shimai faintly gave an enunciation, then said, in a few days, the Empress Dowager and General Pops will come to the royal residence to visit me, Lu Gu, when that time comes, have the doctor prescribe a double dose of medicine for me. Yes, but there is one thing that the slave girl doesn't understand, since Wang Fei is pretending to be sick, why did you let His Highness stay by your side, aren't you afraid of being discovered by His Highness? If His Highness doesn't live in my courtyard, how can I lure Lan Dui? If something doesn't happen to Lan Duoer, how could I let that mastermind behind the scene personally come to my door? Yun Shimai sneered. Lu Gu was lost in thought for a moment, then came to a realization, she wouldn't be unaware of what kind of relationship Lan Duoer and Yun Shuisui Sleeve had, when they hadn't even left the pavilion yet, the two had often traveled together, and it was Yun Shuisui Sleeve's introduction that allowed Lan Duoer to marry the king. The two people are working together. I think this year the princess from the blue door suffered from the gas, is also instigated by the cloud water sleeve. Wang Fei means that the black hand that wants to murder Wang Fei is. Yun Shimai raised her hand and Lu Gu immediately silenced her voice, there are ears on the other side of the wall, be careful what you say. Slave servant knows the error. Keep an eye on Lan Duoer for me, don't allow her to send a message to the palace, but send out the message that Lan Duoer was grounded for bumping into the rightful consort, but was found to be pregnant while grounded. Hashtag Chapter 22, Too Easy to Hook. After receiving the order, Lu Gu no longer asked why and directly ran out. The Wang Fei's mind was meticulous, she couldn't even compare to a hair of the Wang Fei's head, so how could she ask for a reason? Yun Shi Dance eyes a cold, Yun Shuisu that year chose to enter the palace as a consort, not because she likes Dugu Haotian, but because Dugu Haotian is the emperor, always like power Yun Shuisu naturally choose the supreme man, but into the palace for so many years, she in the harem and not favored, not to mention the 1,000 years of ascending to the throne of the empress, but instead, because it is that Sangdao country's first beauty of the title was so favored concubine's shame, so she has been entangled with Dugu Haoran. The purpose is that if there is a day she is desperate, Dugu Haoran is also a good next home. But if Lan Duoer is pregnant and she dies again, with Lan Duoer's low position as the first daughter of the minister of the household, she is bound to ascend to the throne of the main consort, and then she will have no way back. I'm sure that once Yun Shuisui Sleeve knew that Lan Duoer was pregnant, she would definitely be eager to come to the royal residence to find out the truth. 3 days later. In these few days, Yun Shimai ate well and slept well. When she was lonely, she pretended to be sick and tormented Dugu Haoran, letting him serve tea and pour water, looking at Dugaharan's exasperated and withdrawn appearance, Yun Shimai almost spewed out a few times, but she held back in the end. It was a bit of a dull, cloudy day, making it feel a bit depressing. Someone from the palace came early to announce that the Empress Dowager and General Yun were going to come together to visit Yun Shimai, and Yun Shuaishi would also be accompanying them. When the eunuch who delivered the message retreated, Yun Shimai smiled coldly. "Egu, my good sister, how can you be so anxious? How can you not learn to bide your time? You're so easy to get hooked, even if I succeed there is no joy of victory." Close to noon, Yun Shi Dance heard the eunuch's treacherous voice ringing outside, "The Empress Dowager has arrived." Yun Shimai glanced at Lu Gu at her side, the bottom of her eyes cold. "Is everything ready?" "The slave girls are all ready, please don't worry, Your Highness." Yun Shi Dance gave a low then collapsed on the bed. The Empress Dowager was assisted to walk down the carriage, followed by General Yun and the plain-clothed Yun Shuaisui sleeve, only to see that the Empress Dowager's eyes were anxious and her face was dark, but her steps were hurriedly walking towards the inner hall. "My son sees Mother Empress." Dako Hao Ran bent his knees and arched his hand. A bunch of people behind him also followed Hongsheng's salute. The Empress Dowager's icy sight swept over the top of his head, her voice hoarse, "If you have me in your eyes as your mother, you shouldn't have let anything happen to Dancing Child." Dako Hao Ran pursed his lips tightly and remained silent. However, in order to prevent the Empress Dowager's anger, he had the good sense not to follow her over. The Empress Dowager was also unwilling to delay with him and walked quickly towards the inner hall. As for General Yun, as he passed by Dugaharan's side, his large rough hand tightened its grip on the saber at his waist. Messy footsteps came from the doorway, and Yun Shi Dance knew that the person she needed had come. The next second, the Empress Dowager pushed the door in. At the sight of the bloodless Yun Shimai on the bed, the Empress Dowager burst into tears. "Dance Child, mourning family's Dance Child, how did you become like this, The Empress Dowager quickly walked to the bedside and sat down, reaching out to touch Yun Shimai's hair, her tears falling like broken pearls, while General Yun, who was beside the Empress Dowager, was also saddened by the sight of his precious daughter's ailing face, his old eyes tearing up, but only because of the constraints of etiquette, he didn't dare to come forward. Positioned farther, Yun Shui's sleeve eyes ice cold. "Xiao Hai Zi's news is good, Yun Shi Dance really poisoned, there are still a few days, Yun Shi Dance will not die." Yun Shi Dance's gaze quickly swept from Yun Shui's sleeve's face, the bottom of her eyes did not see a single ripple, as if she had never looked at her in general, only to reach out a trembling little hand, touched the white hair on the Empress Dowager's temples, and said feebly, "Auntie, Dance let you worry, these days, your white hair seems to be a bit more, and father, also seems to be a lot older," coughing. Cough. Hearing her violent coughing, the Empress Dowager immediately personally smoothed Yun Shi Dance's air. "Dance Child, you're weak right now, so don't talk, water concubine, quickly pour water." Consort Shui gritted her teeth. The Empress Dowager was too arrogant to indulge this nymphomaniac. She even made her, a consort of the emperor, personally pour water for a royal concubine. But to be able to watch this nymphomaniac die with my own eyes, it was also a way to get rid of this bad anger in my heart. Yun Shueisui's sleeve forced down the anger in her heart to a cup of water and handed it over, softly saying in a soft voice, "Sister, have a drink of water first." Yun Shimai's gaze swept over Yun Shueisui's sleeve's face that had been deliberately retouched, and her heart laughed coldly. Today, instead of coming to visit a sick person, it was better to say that she had come to meet her lover. Why put on such heavy makeup to visit a dying person? "Many thanks, sister." Yun Shi Dance took the water cup from Yun Shui's sleeve's hands, and with a shake of her fingers, the entire cup of water was spilled on the Empress Dowager. Seeing this, Yun Shueisui's sleeve immediately screamed, "Yun Shimai, you nymphomaniac, do you even have the strength to serve water? You even..." Halfway through her words, Yun Shueisui's sleeve steeply met the Empress Dowager's sharp eyes and immediately lowered her head to silence. "Water Princess, watch your words." Looking at the Empress Dowager's icy cold eyes, Yun Shuish's entire face turned green. It wasn't the first time that the Empress Dowager had reprimanded herself for this nymphomaniac, but she couldn't argue with it in spite of her hatred. If the Empress Dowager hadn't been present, she would have flayed the idiot. "Aunt, Dancer is not intentional, why is sister angry with Dancer?" Yun Shimai's eyes were tearful, looking at the Empress Dowager pitifully, but the tip of her eyebrow was provocatively picked. "Dancing child, don't be afraid, with the mourning family here, no one will be able to touch a single hair on your head." The Empress Dowager smoothly held Yun Shi Dance's hand and comforted her. "Empress Dowager, she. Yun Shueisui sleeve, you shut up for the mourning family." Yun Shueisui's sleeve was just about to open her mouth to say something, but she was repelled by the Empress Dowager's stern voice. Yun Shueishi looked at Yun Shimai with hatred, and in her heart, she had already cursed her 1,000 times. Seeing this, General Yun immediately rounded off the scene. "Please calm down the Empress Dowager, Shuei Sleeve's temperament is a bit irritable, it's inevitable that her words are out of place, please don't blame the Empress Dowager, the Empress Dowager's clothes are dirty, the last general or take the Empress Dowager to go to change her clothes. The heart of the hand is all meat, Yun Shi Dance is his daughter, Yun Shuei Sleeve is likewise, even if Yun Shuei Sleeve's actions are not satisfactory, but she is after all her own bloodline." "Good." The Empress Dowager cast a sidelong glance at Yun Shuei Sleeve and left the room with General Yun's assistance. Inside the room, only 2 people were left, Yun Shi Dance and Yun Shuei Sleeve. Yun Shi Dance smiled gently, a touch of ruthless sharpness flashed under her eyes, and she opened her mouth gently. "Sister, all these years, you should have hated your sister very much." Yun Shueishi snorted, "Why should I hate you? Just a nymphomaniac." "Yes, my sister is indeed a nymphomaniac, but this nymphomaniac has gained the favor of my father and aunt, and married Duga Haran, the #1 beautiful man in Sangdao country, as expected, and became the rightful consort of King Jin's house, while you, sister, who is also father's daughter and aunt's niece, cannot get their favor, and has been repeatedly looked down upon in the harem. And even though you are the #1 beautiful woman in Sangdao country, but you have to give me this nymphomaniac as a companion, you say, how can you not hate me?" Chapter 23, Fighting Poison with Poison. Yun Shimai tilted her little head up to look at Yun Shueishi, clearly seeing her expression gradually distort. Suddenly, Yun Shuei Sleeve pointed her long finger at Yun Shimai, narrowed her eyes viciously, and said, "Yes, Yun Shimai, I do hate you, and I can't wait for you to die right away. So, you sent someone to assassinate me outside the palace, causing me to be poisoned by the half-moon immortal?" Yun Shuei Sleeve hooked up her lips sinisterly. Yun Shi Dance is really sorry for the title of nymphomaniac. The method of lassoing is so clumsy, she thought she would be stupid enough to fall for her. "What is my sister saying? My sister can't understand at all." "It doesn't matter if sister doesn't understand, later on, sister will make her understand." Lu Gu crossed the hall. With Yun Shi Dance's low drink, for black shadows quickly sprang out from the 4 corners of the room, and before Yun Shuei Sleeve could come back to her senses, her hands and feet had already been firmly controlled and pressed onto a chair by the 4 masked men. "Yun Shi Dance, you want to revolt, ah?" Before the latter words could be uttered, Lu Gu gagged her with a smelly rag. Yun Shuish's mouth is so stinky that only a stinky rag can fight poison with poison. At this time, only to see Yun Shi Dance slowly lifted the quilt, briskly walked down from the bed. Yun Shueisui Sleeve's eyes were about to split open. Wasn't she about to die? How did she suddenly become like a good person? Isn't sister wondering why sister's illness healed so quickly? Yun Shi Dance laughed a little, a pair of big clear and wave-free eyes blinked innocently, and resumed, "Sister's poison is indeed a strange poison, but those few killers shot so many poisonous needles, but not a single one of them even stabbed me. Do you think that my sister's life is not very big?" Well. Yun Shueisui Sleeve was welling up while struggling hard. she understood, she had fallen into Yun Shimai's treacherous plan, what with Lan Duer being pregnant and what with Yun Shimai being about to die, all of this was just a diversion to lure her into a trap. This was all just a lure to draw her into the trap. At that moment, Lu Gu pulled out a folded silk from his bosom and gently opened it, and inside were silver needles with blackened tips. Yun Shui's sleeve was suddenly shocked. Yun Shimai should not want to take her life. No. No way. If he died here, Yun Shi Dance would not be able to drag the blame. Yun Shi Dance picked up a silver needle in front of Yun Shui's sleeve's eyes shook twice, as if reading her mind, calmly explained, "Sister, don't worry, after you die, I will let people tie your body to a stone and throw it into the lotus pond in the back garden, so that no one will find your body, and your body will be given to the lotus as a fertilizer, and you will also be considered to be dying a good death. As for the Empress Dowager and Father's End, I just say that I don't know where you are going. I believe, the two old men will never make things difficult for a nymphomaniac, hee." Yun Shuishi looked at Yun Shimai incredulously. Is the Yun Shimai in front of her still the same nymphomaniac from the past? The face is the same, but why has the heart become so vicious? As the words prevented them from falling, Yun Shimai raised the silver needle and stabbed down towards Yun Shuish's thigh without hesitation. Well. 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 Yun Shuisui's sleeve wailed in pain, but that wail in the moment it broke through her throat only turned into a low whimper. Yun Shi Dance looked at Yun Shui's sleeve's twisted face in the pain channel, the corner of her lips hooked up a cold smile. She wanted to say, "This consort is the Rome Mama of the Daming Lake back then." Immediately after that, silver needles were like raindrops stabbing at Yun Shui's sleeve, and the lips of Lu Gu on the side were twitching, and a cold sweat broke out on his back. Yun Shui's sleeve, this shot is to zap you for bullying Yun Shi Dance in the past. This shot is to zap you for wasting so much food by eating so much rice. This shot is to zap you for stepping on so many ants in the past. Yun Shi Dance also did not know how Yun Shui's sleeve could be so bitchy. She actually managed to find so many windy excuses to zap her to relieve her hatred. Until she got tired of zapping, Yun Shimai stopped. Lu Gu signaled the four people to let go. Yun Shuishi lost her hands and feet, the whole person wanted to be spread on the ground like a puddle of mud. She endured the pain and lifted her head, looking at Yun Shimai standing in front of her eyes. She spat out the smelly rag in her mouth and gritted her teeth. This palace must snow today's shame. Yun Shimai lazily fiddled with the remaining silver needles in her hand and said with an innocent expression, "Sister, this is something that you should still tell the King of Hell when you get to the Hall of Hades. You few, send this Lady Water concubine on her way." Yun Shuisui's sleeve's body was suddenly cold. Even if she was stupid, she knew what the two words on the road meant. She wanted to yell, but after being stabbed with needles, where was her strength to yell? She could only put her whole body's strength into a final struggle. "I advise my sister to save her strength. If you are resisting, then my sister won't mind stabbing you a few more times." Yun Shuisui's sleeve gasped for air, a blackout in front of her eyes. Could it be that the half-moon immortal's poison was already kicking in? She must return to the palace immediately. There was an antidote in the palace. Thinking of this, Cloud Water's sleeve forcefully climbed to the feet of the Cloud She Dance, reached out and tugged on her pant leg. Low voice pleaded, "Sister. Sister. Is sister wrong? Are sister's fault? You adults do not remember the small man over. Let go of sister it. Well, at least we are also sisters, eh? Sister, past mistakes will never commit again in the future. Please, let me go." Yun Shimai smiled gently. "Sister really knows it's wrong. Got it, really got it." The bottom of Yun Shi Dance's eyes steeply crossed a touch of weird sharpness, and pulled out a piece of paper from her bosom and gently placed it in front of Yun Shui's sleeve, and then said in a cold voice, "If your sister really knows that she is wrong, then sign this." "What's this?" Yun Shui's sleeve hung her head, although her vision was not too clear, but she could see the four big words, "Store Transfer," clearly. This nymphomaniac, he even got the idea of her dowry. In the cloud water sleeve into the palace, in order to let the cloud water sleeve in the harem to stand up, the cloud general special will be a satin bank, 2 money bank, a ship as a dowry to the cloud water sleeve. Only these years the cloud water sleeve is busy in the fight for favor and profit, to the 4 stores neglect. If the cloud Shimai did not mention, she has long been thrown to the stores to the Java country to go. What do you need these stores for? I don't need to know my purpose, sister. As long as I sign it, I can go out. If not, sister can only make bait for the goldfish in the lotus pond. Looking at Yun Shi Dance's serious eyes, Yun Shui's sleeve didn't dare to delay for a moment, and immediately signed and pressed her fingerprints. Anyway, those 4 stores were dispensable to her, and it was worth it to exchange useless things for her life. It was just that Yun Shui's sleeve didn't expect that later, Yun Shimai was the one who utilized these tiny 4 stores to become a rich and powerful female imperial merchant. Seeing Yun Shui's sleeve obediently sign, Yun Shimai put away the transfer, then ordered the crowd, carry consort Shui out through the path in the back garden. Chapter 24, Something happened to sleeve. Yes. A few people agreed in unison, picking up Yun Shuishi like a chicken cub and quickly walking out the back door of the courtyard. When no one was in the room, Lu Gu spoke her concerns to Yun Shi Dance. Wang Fei, if you do this to the 3rd miss, are you not afraid that the 3rd miss will return to the palace? You retaliate? Revenge? In the past, this concubine was as close to her as a sister, but has she counted on this palace less? Lu Gu, go find the shopkeepers of these 4 stores and tell them to report to this consort's Ju Lu Yuan at noon 3 days from now. And at this time, a moment waiting outside the courtyard, Dugu Haran feels some wrong. Just after the Empress Dowager and Cloud Generals go out to change clothes, at this time, the room is only left in the Cloud Shimai and Cloud Water Sleeve 2 people, according to the Cloud Shimai's temperament, even if it is going to die, but also to make a little bit of noise is, how so quiet? And quiet some weird. Could something have happened to the water sleeves? Dugu Haran quickly stepped into the courtyard and pushed open the gate, only to see Yun Shimai collapsed on the bed in a 4-footed manner, with Lu Gu serving on his left and right, where was the shadow of Yun Shuishi. Where is consort Shui? Dekuro Hao Ran walked over and questioned in a cold voice. Yun Shimai opened her eyes, blinking innocently. What did your highness say? Why can't I understand? I'm asking you, where is Princess Shui now? Dugu Haran's 10 fingers clenched tightly, making a kaka sound. Yun Shi Dance looked at Dugu Haran blankly, reaching out and pointing to the door. Fawn went out, didn't the king see it? Nonsense. I've been outside the courtyard, why haven't I seen consort Shui go out? Yun Shimai, are you playing some trick against consort Shui? You say. Is it? In the face of Dugu Haran's aggressiveness, Yun Shi Dance's heart only cold laughter. The world of infatuation of the man is certainly rare, but do not distinguish between right and wrong. Man is even more hateful. Your Highness, I'm sick and my hands are powerless. What can I do to consort Shui? If your Highness doesn't believe me, you can search my concubine's room. However, if your Highness finds nothing. After searching, this concubine will definitely demand justice from your Highness as well. Yun Shi Dance raised her eyebrows, and that provocative look seemed to say, search if you have the guts, search Dekuro Hao Ren gritted his teeth. This room of hers wasn't big, it could be said that it could be seen at a glance, such a room to say that to hide a person was simply more difficult than the ascent of the sky. Dugu Haran's eyes narrowed slightly. Consort Shui is your sister, although she was not born from the same mother, she is still a sister of the family. Even if you are dissatisfied with her, you should still take into consideration General Yun. After all, the old general does not wish to see you sisters not getting along. Yun Shi Dance's heart-cold smile. Dugu Haran, in the end, the brain turn is very fast, and she played the affection card. Cough cough, what your Highness said is extremely true. This concubine thinks the same way. If your Highness is fine, this concubine would like to rest now. After saying that, Yunshi Dance slowly closed her eyes. Dako Horan gave her a resentful look, and although he still felt that there was something fishy about this matter in his heart, he still turned around and left. Yunshi, this girl, it is hard to believe that she will change into a living person, and even turned Yun Shui's sleeve out of existence under her own eyes. When the Empress Dowager and General Yun came back, Yun Shimai only said that Yun Shuisu returned to the palace first because she was not feeling well. The Empress Dowager and General Yun didn't ask more questions. Since the beginning, Yun Shimai didn't say half a word about Dugu Haran, but praised him. The Empress Dowager's attitude towards Dugu Haran was slightly eased. The two of them said some words of concern with Yun Shi Dance before they left reluctantly. In the evening, Dugu Haran stayed at Yun Shi Dance's full garden for dinner, but his face didn't look good, as if who owed him $8 million. Yun Shi Dance didn't pay any attention to it, but just quietly ate the rice that Lu Gu fed over. This temperament of Dako Horan, sooner or later she would have to cure it. Just now was not the time. She had to use her mind and energy on those 4 stores. Silk houses, money changers, furniture workshops, shipping lines. Oh, with money and material, why not worry about getting rich? Just by thinking about the large amount of snowflake silver, Yun Shi Dance was too excited to sleep. Are you sure you took your medication at night? Dugu Haran asked seriously as he raised his eyebrows at the sight of the refined light that flashed under Yun Shimai's eyes and the bizarre curve at the corner of his lips. Yun Shi Dance had a cold, but now how he looked like a snake charmer. Yun Shi Dance turned her eyes to look at him, coughed lightly and nodded calmly. Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. I've already eaten it. It tastes good. Would Your Majesty like to have some as well? This king doesn't have that interest. Dekuro Haoran gave her a sidelong glance and twisted his head to eat on his own. Yun Shi Dance converged the sharpness in the bottom of her eyes, the corner of her lips gently hooked, and her eyes slowly glanced out the window. Outside the dark clouds stacked, seems to be changing the sky. Also right, this day, is to change the time. Next morning Dako Haoran woke up in a burst of rice aroma. These days he was tossed around by Yun Shi Dance. He did all the work done by the servant girl, so yesterday as soon as he went to bed, he slept to death, and when he woke up, he found that his stomach was already empty. Dugu Haran dressed up and followed the aroma out, and realized that the strong fragrance was coming from Yun Shi Dance's house. He walked over with big strides and didn't let the subordinate inform him. He walked into her room himself. As expected, the dining table was filled with delicious dishes, and they were all full of color and flavor, while Yun Shimai was being helped by Lu Gu to sit on the chair mountain, enjoying the delicious breakfast. You don't know to call on this king for breakfast, Yun Shimai, you are really excessive. Dugu Haran walked over and sat down, picked up the bowl and chopsticks to clip the dishes, but what he wanted to clip, Yun Shimai always managed to clip it before him. As a result, Dugu Haran didn't clip a piece of the dish after half a day of clipping it. On the contrary, Yun Shimai ate it with gusto. Yun Shimai, what do you mean? Are you sincerely not letting this king have his meal? Dugu Haran accused nonchalantly, his face red with anger. Cough cough. Yun Shimai coughed a few times, blinking her big innocent eyes, very puzzled and asked, Your Highness, what is wrong with you? Did my concubine do something to make your Highness unhappy? Pretend, you keep pretending. Obviously he didn't want him to use the meal just now, but now he's pretending to be innocent with him. Will he believe it? Yun Shimai coughed continuously a few more times, her clear eyes looking at the man in front of her. Your Highness, a few days ago you were still sweet and gentle to your concubine, but now you are so cold. Could it be that because the Empress Dowager and the General's old man are gone, your Highness feels that your concubine is no longer of any use, and that's why you are like this? The implication is, Dako Horan, you are unloading the donkey and killing the rabbit. You. Dako Hojo was dumbfounded all of a sudden. Yun Shi Dance sighed deeply. Your Highness, everyone in the Dome country's nationals say that you are a righteous man. If you know that you treat this consort harshly, the nationals don't know how to talk about it. Maybe. Maybe what? Yun Shimai smiled wickedly. maybe I'll take off the king's pants and spank him. Hashtag chapter 25, so tempted to storm off. Puff. Lu Gu at her side finally couldn't hold back and let out a giggle, while the other maidservants in the room also let out suppressed laughter. None of them had ever imagined that one day, the flamboyant princess would play the wise and overly wise prince like a fool. No laughing allowed. If any of you dare to laugh again, this king will throw whoever it is into the handyman's room for hard labor. With Dugu Haren's low voice, the servant girls in the room all stifled their laughter, but the corners of their lips still couldn't help but twitch. Yunshi Dance arched her eyebrows and innocently asked, What are you guys laughing at? When we did something wrong when we were little, Dad didn't always take off our pants and spank us, what's so funny? Ow. King. Dugu Haren's lungs are going to be exploded with anger, his face suddenly reddened, took a deep breath, looked squarely at Yunshi Dance who was sitting in front of him, with a leisurely face, and softly called out word by word, Yun. She. Dance. What is it? Yunshi Dance tilted up her innocent little face and looked at him expectantly. Are you trying to piss this king off? Dugu Haren had never asked a question so seriously before. Yunshimai dragged her chin and thought for a while, and finally shook her head, looking sincere as she replied, Dead people are meaningless. It's still fun to be alive, Your Majesty. In the future, my concubine will play with you like this every day, okay? Dugu Haren instantly stormed out, and the moment he left the house, Yunshimai's unrestrained laughter resounded behind him. After having breakfast, Yunshi Dance let Lu Gu lie on the bed for herself and pretend to be sick, while she herself walked out of the royal residence in male attire. Although the 4 stores she already held in her hands, but the operation of these 4 stores she does not understand very well, she must find out the details before planning. Along the imperial capital most prosperous received all the way down, both sides of the stores, a wide range of goods, restaurants, pawnshops, gestures clothing stores have everything, ears also from time to time came to the sound of hawking. Yunshi Dance gently pull up the lips, the more developed the economy, the more opportunities she has, after all, compared with these ancient people, their own business ideas more integrated. Yunshi Dance walked to a silk store door to stop her feet. Here is the first store under her name, is Hao Shui Silk Villa. Frowning slightly, Dugu Haren and Yun Shui's sleeve were also too blatant, they even used the names of both parties to name the store. Walked in, the store is sparse, the shopkeeper in front of the counter lying down to sleep, a boy with a chicken feather duster has a hitch to sweep the dust on the satin. Yunshimai's eyebrows knit more tightly, this is sure to open the door to do business well. Xiao how much is this cloth? Yunshimai patted a blue-colored satin by her side and asked in a lowered voice line. Xiao lazily turned his head and looked askance at Yunshi Dance, then turned his head and lazily said, 20 taels. 20 taels. What kind of cloth to be so expensive? Yunshimai abruptly widened her eyes, finally realizing the reason why this store had no business. Xiao disdainful gaze swept over Yunshi Dance's face, sneering, buy if you can afford it, don't buy if you can't, this brocade is the same as all the fabrics of the palace's Lady Shui Fei, 20 taels can buy the fabric that the lady wears, and you still think it's too expensive. Yunshi Dance did not say anything, turned around, silently walked out of the satin bank, and the next 2 money changers in a boathouse she walked through did the same, and the reason was amazingly consistent, this industry is the lady water concubines, you love to come not come. It seems that the task on one's shoulders is very heavy not only to remodel these 4 stores, but also to start cultivating their own men. After all, these 4 stores are not easy to run. However, when she first came here, she was surrounded by enemies, and there were many people who wanted to get her killed, but there were very few who could help her. Yunshimai was thinking about her mind, she didn't even look at the road, and the result was that she hit a wall with a bang. Yunshi Dance rubbed the tip of her sore and numb nose and looked up to see a man with bronze skin and a very heroic appearance standing in front of her. The man glared at her with both eyes, seemingly with no intention of apologizing at all. Yun Shimai had a lot of things bothering her and didn't want to bother with him, she just walked around and left straight away. But she had only taken a few steps when she heard a sneering voice from behind. Yo, isn't this young master and, why? Why are you standing in front of my house so early in the morning? Young master and Yun Shi Dance has heard of it, and Zhu Yang, the eldest son of the first merchant in Hao in the imperial capital, 30% of the money houses in the imperial capital belong to the Yin family's industry, the family's assets are 10,000 habits, and is rich enough to rival the country. Yun Shi Dance slowly turned around, only to see Zhu Yang in a coarse cloth clothes, facing each other's mockery face without changing color, towering, not the slightest annoyance. And then look at the man across the street, thieving eyebrows, sharp mouth and monkey cheeks, a short-lived look. Lin Dehai, I'm here to talk to Uncle Lin about something, it has nothing to do with you. And Chuyang said coldly. Lin Dehai raises an eyebrow and says with a cold smile, and Chuyang, you've been here 3 times already, and every time you don't leave by the door, didn't I tell you, borrowing money? Dream on. You still think you're the old young master and, your family's money bank is finished. You're no better than my servant now. Be a good boy and get out of here. Don't let me send someone to blow you away, and then, you'll be the one with no face. And Chuyang's eyes narrowed, the bottom of his eyes were a mixture of light and darkness, then he lowered his head and softened his tone, Mr. Shang would like to see Uncle Lin for a while. Please make it easy for young Master Lin. Lin Dehai's face turned cold, a fine face steeply became hideous, loudly and coldly drinking, toast the wine, but not to eat the penalty wine. Come on, blow away and Chuyang for this young master. Yes. Afterwards, a few household servants with sticks and whips rushed towards Chuyang, one of them kicked him in the leg, and Chuyang's whole body fell to the ground. Immediately after that, a few household servants surrounded Chuyang and started to beat him up. That stance is not to repel, it's clearly to beat Chuyang to death. Yes, the Yin family is rich, the emperor's eyes can't tolerate sand. Hush, keep your voice down, this is a matter of state, you and I as civilians can't say anything, we will be beheaded. Yun Shi Dance perked up her ears and listened to the discussion of several people, then glanced at Chuyang who didn't say anything even though he was beaten up by the group, a flash of light steeply flashed in her eyes. Killing people is just a headache, Mr. Lin, you've gone a bit too far. Yun Shimai suddenly raised her voice and shouted. Huh? Lin Dehai thought he had heard wrongly, in this land, there was still someone who dared to stop him. Following the sound, he saw a handsome man slowly approaching, Lin Dehai's face unconsciously revealed a silver evil light, what a handsome appearance, simply more handsome than the small herdsman in the small herdsman's pavilion. He raises his hand to stop the group beating of the household servants, and reveals a lewd smile at Yun Shi Dance, I wonder which family's son, how come I've never seen him before. Hashtag chapter 26, straight up fainting hashtag looking at Lin Dehai's mouth watering, Yun Shimai gave a cold snort of disdain and arched her hand, I am King Jin strategist, night flying. Lin Dehai raised an eyebrow in confusion, night flight. He had heard that Night Fly was 8 feet tall and had a handsome face, but how could he be a boy and a girl? What? Don't believe it. Yun Shimai pulled out the Jin Wangfu's token from her bosom and placed it in front of Lin Dehai's eyes once and for all, saying, open your dog's eyes and see clearly what this is. On top of the pure gold token, there was a shining Jin character printed. Lin Dehai's face immediately changed drastically, and he hurriedly arched his hand as a salute, I have eyes but I don't recognize empty tie, please don't be offended, Mr. Nightfly. Yun Shi Dance smiled coldly and kicked the token in her arms, this token was the one she took advantage of Duga Haran's absence to take away from his room, and she didn't expect it to really come in handy. Mr. Lin, it's better to settle grievances than to tie them up. After beating and scolding, I think we should let today's matter go. Lin Dehai were dare to offend Nightfly, so hurriedly nodded his head and said, "Yes, yes, yes, Mr. Nightfly said yes, you phew, hurry to help Princeton up. Little brat, lighten up, can't you see that Mr. N is in pain, don't want to live you." Yun Shimai helped An Chuyang up, looked at his face covered in dirt and blood, glanced at Lin Dehai, and then stretched out her 5 fingers to him. "Mr. Nightfly, what is the meaning? You don't pay medical fees for hitting someone. There are also convalescence fees, lost labor costs, moral damages. Amount. Let's see, add it up, 1,000 taels. Hurry up and pay." Lin Dehai was like a thunderbolt, 1,000 taels. His yearly living expenses. Heartbreakingly pulling out silver tickets, Lin Hai reluctantly handed over, "But who knows, Yun Shi dance white eyes, cold voice, I'm talking about gold, lol." Lin Dehai directly fainted. The house guests and the crowd of actors on the sidelines were also dumbfounded. It was said that Night Flight was the #1 strategist beside King Jean, but I didn't expect Night Flight to be so dark. However, even if Nightfly wanted his entire Lin family, he, Lin Dehai, wouldn't dare to not give it, or else he was afraid that he would not be able to keep his little life. So, Yun Shi dance with 1,000 taels of gold, racked and Chuyang joyfully left, leaving Lin Hai in the wind lonely tears. After arranging An Chuyang in a nearby inn and finding a doctor to check his pulse and determining that he had only suffered superficial injuries, Yun Shimai let go of her heart. The medicine prescribed by the doctor was ordered to be decocted by the inn's boy, and Yun Shimai fed the medicine into An Chuyang's mouth 1 spoonful at a time. An Chuyang slightly opened his eyes, and when he saw Yun Shimai's appearance, his face turned cold. You, who the hell are you?" "Cough, cough." Yun Shimai said while smoothing out his breath, "If I were you, I wouldn't ask such a stupid question. You're not Nightfly." He had a meeting with Nightfly several years ago, and although his appearance was a little hard for him to remember, it was by no means the appearance of the man in front of him. "It doesn't matter if I'm Nightflight, it doesn't matter who I am, what matters is that I saved you. You owe me a favor." "Did I say I asked you to save me?" An Chuyang played a scoundrel. Yun Shimai smiled gently and put down the bowl of medicine in her hand. "If the chivalrous and righteous Dukan, who has been made to be a chivalrous and righteous man, wants to be an ungrateful villain, I can't stop him." At those words, An Chuyang's head immediately slid down countless black lines. This kind of provocation was used very clumsily, but it happened to poke his soft underbelly, making him very popular. "Good. Consider it a favor I owe you. How do you want me to repay this favor?" Yun Shi danced gently, smiled and turned around, leaving behind a faint gardenia fragrance. "After 5 days, I will come back to find you again. In these days, you will honestly stay here for me, take medicine and eat on time. If I come and find that you have lost weight and become dark and ugly, I will let you live as if you are worse than dead." When Yun Shi dance returned to the royal mansion, it was already dark. As soon as she entered the door, Lu Gu fluttered out of bed, tugging at her sleeve, constantly pouring out her bitterness. "Your Highness, slave girl, please, next time don't let the slave girl pretend to be sick. The slave girl is used to working, so letting the slave girl lie on the bed for a day is really difficult for the slave girl." Yun Shimai laughed softly and reached out to nod on Lu Ji's head. "Silly girl, you won't even enjoy the blessings you have." At this moment, the voice of a servant girl sounded outside the door. "Your Highness, His Highness has invited you to the main hall to have your meal." Lu Gu glanced at Yun Shi dance and saw her shake her head without moving, and immediately replied back, "Go back and tell His Highness that today, Princess Wang is weak and should not go out to eat, and that it's fine to bring the evening meal to your room." Yes. Yun Shi dance had wanted to have a peaceful dinner, but it seemed that some people always didn't let her have her way. No, Dugu Haran himself came striding in with his dinner plate. Yun Shimai raised her eyebrows. She wouldn't be so stupid as to think that Dako Hao Ran was doing this because he was in love with her. After Dugu Haran helped her to sit down on a chair and sat himself on her side, Yun Shimai raised her eyebrows at him and said softly, "Your Highness, have you taken the wrong medicine?" Dekuro Hojo shook his head very seriously. No. You have poison in this meal? Dr. Hojo shook his head again. No. So the king has a brain fart. Dugu Haran took a deep breath, looked deeply at Yun Shimai, and called out to her in a low voice, Yun Shimai. What? Yun Shimai blinked her eyes, seemingly innocent but actually dark and sinister. Are you going to die if you don't piss me off for a day? Oh, no, it's just going to be a little hard. Besides, my concubine is already dying. Dugu Haran was frantic. He suddenly realized how it was so hard for him to be nice to Yun Shimai. He was very tired of this Yunshi dance. Every time he tried to appease her a bit, but every time he was almost exasperated by her to the point of being half dead. If on weekdays, he would have thrown up his sleeve and left, but this time the Empress Dowager gave an order that he must personally take care of this woman. Now that General Yun is back in the house, it's just a matter of enduring it. He twisted his head and served a bowl of rice in front of Yun Shi Dance, patiently saying to her, "This is the meal that this king has specially instructed his subordinates to prepare for you. It's fine, soft and nutritious, you try it." Yun Shi Dance turned around outside for a day, patrolled the 4 stores he just got, and inadvertently ran into someone who seemed extremely useful to him. His mood was extremely good, and now he is even pretending to be naive and selling himself to the world, lifting up his flowery eyes, and speaking to Dugu Haran in a deep and delicate voice, "Your Highness, you are so good to me. After my concubine gets well, I will definitely stay with your Highness every inch of the way, and serve your Highness at all times." She tried desperately to squeeze out a few tears of emotion, and before the meal was even eaten, she felt like she was going to be sickened by the look on her face. Without any trace, Dugu Haran slightly shifted his body away a little, not allowing Yun Shimai to snuggle into his arms. Seeing her daffy look with tears hanging on her chin, he couldn't help but feel a pang of disgust. Chapter 27, Restrictions on Freedom. He is disgusted by even one more look at her, but she still wants to stick to him all the time. Dugu Haran, who wanted to calmly appease her for a while, could no longer sit still, took a deep breath, hid the disgust under his eyes, set the rice bowl on the tray, got up and walked to the window, pretending to look at the scenery. He disliked Yun Shi Dance too much, so he also didn't notice that when he turned around by feigning to look at the scenery, the corners of her lips curved out into a wry and smug light smile. She had only just begun the first step of her wealth-raising plan, so how could she let this asshole prince restrict her personal freedom? If he came to appease her from time to time, wouldn't she have no time to sneak out of the palace to do her own business? Look at that look of disgust on his face, yuck. She didn't even look at a self-righteous big sand pig like him. It was better to dislike her, it was better that he ignored her completely so that she could be free to handle her own affairs. She now had to think hard about how to change those 4 messes of Yun Shuish and make them strong so that they could make more money for her. That and Choyang should be a usable talent. I'll have to go see if he's listened to her instructions and taken care of himself someday. Dugu Haran stood at the window for a long time, but he didn't see Yun Shimai get up and follow her in a flamboyant manner, so he curiously turned back to look, but he saw that she was already eating in a serious manner. Her quiet appearance was actually quite beautiful and attractive. This thought flashed, Dugu Haran's face immediately surfaced a flash of disbelief. He would actually think that she is still clear and beautiful. This woman is obviously ugly and stupid, less than 1/10,000th of Shui's sleeve. Where is she beautiful? He must have stayed with her for a long time, and even his aesthetics have unconsciously changed. He shook his sleeve as if some toxic dust had gotten on it. Yun Shi Dance, who was eating her meal, was actually still secretly watching Dugu Haran's every move. When she saw him like this, she couldn't help but secretly laugh. Of course she knew what he was flinging. Since he was so disgusted, why did he still rely on her and not leave? Go, 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 before she can't even eat her meal, and that food just sticks to her stomach and it's unbearable. At this moment, Lon Duor entered Yun Shi Dance's courtyard with a maid, and she stood outside the door, her eyes filled with jealousy. The king obviously prefers himself, but Yun Shimai, this hateful woman, relying on the fact that she has a strong backer, forced the king to dominate in his own courtyard, which really makes people angry and hateful. If there was no Yunshi dance, she might have been the rightful consort. When she thought of this, her voice couldn't help but be a little more delicate, and she daintily went up and called out, "Sister Wangfei, is His Highness here with you?" "Someone from the palace has come, saying that the emperor has won a good painting, and invited His Highness to go to the palace to savor it." As soon as her words fell, she saw Duguharan striding out of Yunshi Dance's house with a touch of relaxed pleasure on his face, asking loudly, "Is that so?" Blue-side consort, quickly go and have someone prepare a car, this king will immediately enter the palace. Inside the house, Yun Shimai, supported by Lu Gu, closely chased out the door, carrying a lingering expression on her face as she called out to Duguharan, who was leaving in big strides, "Your Highness, my concubine will also go to the palace with you." Lan Duoer gently dodged in front of Yun Shimai, deliberately blocking her gaze towards Duguharan, and said under her breath, "Your Highness, you have not yet recovered from your serious illness, how can you run around and exert yourself? Aren't you letting His Majesty not feel at ease? This consort and the king are unwilling to part." Yun Shimai said sadly. With his back turned to her, a feeling of disgust once again rose in the heart of Duguharan, and he walked away without looking back. Seeing this, Lan Duoer raised her hand, covered her mouth with her sleeve, and with a light smile on her face, she said to Yun Shimai, "Wangfei, if you want to not be separated from the king, you have to think of other ways. Fair, let's go." Su Hongfei, who was following behind Lan Duer, also gloated and glanced at Yun Shimai's master and servant, and contemptuously trailed her master as she left. "Your Highness, they're too hateful to disrespect you like that," Lu Gu exasperatedly said as she glared at the backs of Randall's master and servant. "She thinks that the Wangfei is really pretty and good-hearted, but unfortunately, the king always fails to see her goodness and never treats her well. Now even Blue-side consort is trying to bully the Wang consort. Does this deserve my consort's anger? You're a little girl, what do you know? Even if your master is the crown princess, sometimes you still need to be careful with your words, didn't I tell you? Beware of walls with ears." Yun Shimai sighed slightly. This girl was too loyal, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to resist shouting for her one day and disrupt her plans for nothing. Randall wants to bully her. That would have to be seen if she had that ability or not. But Your Highness, it's too rude and excessive for them to treat you like this. There will be a time when they regret it. Yun Shi Dance gently shook her head, "Well, people are all gone, there's nothing lively to see, let's also go back to the house to rest. Today you're tired of lying down, but I'm still tired of running." That damned scumbag had come to keep watch from the moment she'd walked in the door, and that meal had just been unpleasant, so now it was her turn to enjoy it. "Crown Princess, you walk a little slower." Lu Gu was busy stepping forward to assist Yun Shimai. "Pfft! Did you forget that I'm pretending to be sick? Helping what? Quickly go and change some delicious food for me, I can't eat what Duguharan served me." Yun Shimai laughed lightly and said to Lu Gu. "Yes, Lu Gu will go right away." Lu Gu glanced at Yun Shier in surprise, and then busily withdrew her surprised gaze. She realized that her master had really changed, although she was still not allowed to be liked by the king, but she was not as helpless and sad as before, and there seemed to be a feeling that made people stop worrying. However, she liked this current appearance of the crown princess. Duguharan, who had left Yun Shi Dance's courtyard, put away the look of excitement on his face. In fact, he likes calligraphy, and painting is just an excuse to make the emperor think that he is not interested in the regime, only indulging in the joy of red sleeves. Tonight, his brother suddenly let him into the palace to enjoy the paintings again, afraid that he thought of what idea to test him. Apart from Yun Shui's sleeve, no one had ever seen that he also had such a wise and steady side, and if such a side was seen by Duguhautian, he was only afraid that his defense against him would be far more than what it is today. It wasn't quite late at night, but the entire Dome country was already shrouded in a slight darkness. The majestic and tall imperial city, in the night color, showed a more solemn feeling. Only when Dugu Haran's carriage arrived at the palace gates, a eunuch with a smile on his face stepped forward to greet him. "Ah, King Jean has come. My slave greets King Jean." His Majesty was so happy that he couldn't wait for tomorrow after getting a good painting that he asked his old slave to wait here for King Jean to enter the palace. Dugu Haran, who was sitting inside the carriage, had a faint touch of mockery in his eyes. How could he not know what the emperor was anxious about in his heart? A calligraphy and painting is just a painting. Even if he likes it more, he doesn't have to rush to let him come to the palace so late at night. He let out a through the curtain and said, "Why did the eunuch have to come to meet you personally? It's not like this king doesn't know the way." Chapter 28, The Idle Prince #, That eunuch just laughed along with him, his feet quickly following the side of the carriage. This was only near the palace gates. A little further in, it was King Jin's carriage that could not enter. The eunuch guided Dugu Haran towards Dugu Hautian's chambers, and outside the gilded hall, he reported to the people inside the hall with a shrill voice, "Your Majesty, King Jean has arrived." Dugu Hautian, who stood in front of the wide imperial table with his back to the door of the hall, put away his cold and hostile expression, and when he turned his head, he already had a face as warm as the spring breeze. "Oh, King Jean, you can come. I have obtained a good painting. Knowing that you are a lover of paintings, I specially invited you to come into the palace to savor it. Come, come, come," he beckoned to Dugu Haran with a cordial look, "come to the table and see whose handwriting this is. Can this painting still catch your eye?" His voice, with a few points of generosity and favor, as if Dugu Haran was really his very favored younger brother. However, if King Jean really didn't pose the slightest threat to him, he wouldn't mind treating him better and letting him be a powerless, idle prince for the rest of his life. Only, was King Jean really as he acted? Dugu Haran also had a delighted look on his face, and when he saw his imperial brother beckoning, he quickly leaned over, and when he looked down and saw the painting on the desktop, he was slightly surprised. Is this painting an ancient painting that has been lost for many years in legend? It was made by Zheng Chou, who was in the midst of his country's fame at the time of its founding. He excitedly looked towards Dugu Hautian. The painting was indeed a good painting, which could be said to be of great value, and this painting was precisely painted by a famous artist, Mr. Zheng Chou, at the time of the founding of the Dome country. In the painting, the rivers and mountains were majestic and the rivers were magnificent, showing the magnificence of the newly established Dome kingdom. Dugu Haran's sword eyebrow slightly raised. What is the meaning of the imperial brother showing him this painting? What do you want him to evaluate? In a sidelong glance, he caught a hint of cold hostility at the corner of Dugu Hautian's lips, and when the other party's gaze was directed at him, he had already lowered his head to carefully enjoy the painting. Not bad, it should be Mr. Zheng's work. It's so beautiful and magnificent. It leaps all the magnificent colors of my Dome kingdom into the painting. He pointed at the painting on the table and exclaimed with heartfelt admiration. Dugu Hautian glanced at him with a light smile and suddenly asked, "King Jean, the kingdom is so beautiful, doesn't King Jean want to share a bit of the state affairs for his royal brother?" Dugu Haran looked at the emperor in disbelief, blinked his eyes and asked in confusion, "Why did your brother say that?" "Your brother has made our Dome so strong and stable. I am glad that Dome has such a bright ruler every day, and I still do my part on weekdays. What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" Looking at Dako Haran's puzzled expression, Dako Hautian's brows frowned slightly. "King Jean, is he really at ease doing insignificant things in the court? Is he willing to be an idle prince? He was doing things on weekdays, but they were just the usual chores, just like most officials in the court who didn't have much ambition. Could this be his true thoughts? Since he was a child, he has been deeply loved by his father. Among several brothers, Dugu Haran is smart and capable of writing and martial arts. I thought that he would be the biggest one of the strongest enemy, but I can't imagine that his mind is not on the affairs of the country. Ha ha ha. Dugu Haotian hid the doubt in his heart and laughed cheerfully. King Jin is overly concerned. I rarely have a moment of leisure in my heart, which has the time to have anything on my mind. Come, let's take a look at this painting style again. How? It was obvious that he was uneasy with himself, yet he still had to make a picture of caring about himself. Dugu Haoran secretly mocked in his heart, but shifted his gaze along with Dugu Haotian's topic. After the two of them supported the lamp and enjoyed the painting for a while, Dugu Haoran excused himself by saying that the princess was not yet recovered from her illness, and the Empress Dowager had ordered him to take care of it in person, so he asked to go back to the residence. Dugu Haotian is just to test him by enjoying the paintings, and now that the suspicion in his heart has subsided a lot, he nodded and allowed him to leave the palace and go back to his house. When passing through the west gate, in the shadow of the nicknamed flowers and trees, a familiar slender